Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order at exactly 10:30 a.m. So welcome to our special General Committee meeting today to deal with the 2024 consolidated budget. And with that, I would ask Councillor Schumacher, would you mind reading the land acknowledgement, please?
Sure. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robertson-Huron Treaty number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred places, and take action towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Schumacher. And before we go to the adoption of the agenda, I would like to introduce Randy Bissonnette, who will be joining us, there, looking over there, and who has just raised his hand to say hello to everybody. Randy has agreed to help us with the transition period, given the departure of our former Director of Operations. So welcome, Randy, and thank you for being here today. You jumped right into, a very exciting forum. So with that, I would like to move to the adoption of the agenda, and I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Armour, seconded by Councillor Cloutier. It is recommended that the Special General Committee meeting agenda dated Tuesday, December 12th, 2023, be adopted as printed and circulated. Questions, comments, all those in favor? And that carries. Look at that right away. And are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, then I am so pleased to, at this point, turn the next section of the main portion of the meeting over to Councillor Morrison, who will take over as chair.
I'm not so pleased by that. Just kidding. Yeah, thank you everyone for this special meeting. Mostly, I want to thank all of the staff, the senior leadership team, and all the managers and all the staff below the managers that have worked so many hours towards this budget. Nobody has any idea how many hours have gone into it, but our staff have done everything they can to bring us something that we can try to work with. Now it's our job to work with that, and I'd like to thank on behalf of all of council, our staff, for all the hard work. I'm going to pass it on to Julia and Suzanne, but should I read this motion first? Okay, and then we'll get on to the presentation. So I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Armour, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. It is recommended that the Town of Huntsville draft 2024 consolidated budget as attached to report Corp 2023-86 be approved with a total levy of $22,902,198 and forwarded to council for consideration. Okay, and with that being read, I'll pass it over to you guys.
Thank you, Chair Morrison, for the opportunity to provide committee with an overview of the 2024 draft consolidated budget. We will have time for questions towards the end of the presentation and also during the departmental overview, so there'll also be opportunities for questions for those specific areas.
We will be providing a high-level overview of the draft budget. The details for each of the divisions and budget areas can be found within the budget report, starting with Appendix A, which provides an overview by division, page 91, with the detailed draft budget starting on page 93. This budget document can also be found on the town's website at huntsville.ca. So some highlights. This is Council's first look at the consolidated draft budget that staff have prepared. 2 previous reports have been provided to committee for their review and approval prior to the presentation of the consolidated budget to allow for committee members to have more time to focus on specific areas of the budget, such as capital and salaries, wages, and benefits. There is a special general committee meeting scheduled for January 11th to provide committee with further opportunities to discuss and provide direction on the consolidated budget.
Staff were given direction to bring back a budget within the guidelines that were set with our budget and financial controls policy. Staff recognize this budget being presented is outside of this guidelines, and it is due to several factors that will be noted throughout this presentation. just high level, given the challenges that we knew we would face during the 2024 budget process, such as the removal of the one-time COVID funds, the unprecedented inflation that's being seen across the country, and right-sizing our various human capital resources. It should also be noted as well that the increase was much higher when staff originally presented us with their draft budgets. The working group worked away at reducing it where it is today. There were further increases that were proposed for roads and fleet particularly, for materials and supplies and contracted services. The amounts were originally proposed to increase road maintenance budgets as a starting point to allow for more flexibility throughout the year to address roads maintenance issues as they arise. What is remaining right now in the draft budget is just to keep up with the current price of last year's budget. It is expected that there will be 2 staff reports of significance that will impact the 2025 budget and beyond that will be presented in mid-2024. In particular, this is the asset management plan update, which is a legislative requirement, which will have an updated financial strategy proposed on the town's current infrastructure, and we'll also look at current and proposed levels of service and the related costs of maintaining current levels of service or changing those service levels. As well, there will be the updated roads needs study, which will provide committee with an update on the status of the conditions of the town roads and estimate replacement and rehabilitation amounts for each of those roads based on the current dollars. Staff did their best to reduce the impacts of various factors on the levy increase while keeping within the parameters of the existing policies. For example, staff have not recommended to take funding from an environmental reserve into revenue in 2024 as there is a bylaw and a policy restricting from doing so, and that would have to be a council decision. So overall, the net levy being proposed in the budget is 22.9 million, and this does not include the community requests that were brought forward in October and are outlined in Appendix F. Should committee approve including these items in the budget for approval, these will further impact the proposed tax increase. So the year-over-year increase in the levy is 3.5 million. There are many factors that are having significant impacts on the town's resources. This includes the fact that the population of Huntsville has increased by 11% over the past 10 years. The town is also facing post-COVID impacts. Services and users are returning with increased demand on the municipality, and there is a ripple effect. For example, community services programs require staff, cleaning, materials, hydro, all at which cost more in today's dollars than they did pre-COVID. One division in particular, community services, is seeing an increased demand for the use of facilities and programs. For example, aquatics registration is up by 11%, fitness programs offerings have doubled, MHP visitations up by 76%, and theater ticket sales up by 25%. Therefore, we're seeing a trend of increasing costs for materials and supplies, contracted services and maintenance costs, as well as increase in revenue. So we were asked what is making up this increase of the 3.5 million, and we've tried to break it down in one chart here. So over the year, this is a list of what accounts for the increase. So we have the inflationary and increased use of programs and facilities, and that's the impact on materials and supplies contracted services, and that makes up about 38% of the total increase. The increase for funding for ongoing capital costs, so this is our contributions to reserves, is 23%. We have annualized staff positions and changes to employee compensation and benefits, which include statutory employer costs, which account for 24%. The one-time COVID recovery funding and MAT funding that was removed from the budget as a one-time item, that accounts for 18% of the increase. Changes to the staff complement to provide programs and services in 2023. So these are the in-year items, and that's 12%. We have increased staff resources to support town parks, other outdoor facilities, and winter snow operations, which was outlined in the SWB report and approved by committee, and this accounts for 8%, with the remaining amounts being about 3%. And these are offset by an increase in revenues across the organization of 26%, which is showing as a negative.
We'll now present an overview of the operating revenues, expenses, and reserve contributions. The increased demands in program and services being offered is expected to increase revenues for the town. As you can see in this budget, there is an overall increase in revenues of almost $900,000. This is primarily in the areas of general revenues such as user fees, interest, and shared services. Areas of particular interest include revenue from $42,000 anticipated increased revenue from IT shared service agreement with Lake of Bays, $155,000 anticipated revenues from the corporate services shared services agreement with Lake of Bays, $210,000 estimated increase in interest income, which is anticipated due to favorable interest rates changes, over $41,000 overall estimated revenue increase at Algonquin Theatre, $84,000 overall estimated program revenue increase from recreation and leisure, $10,000 from Muskoka Heritage Place, $23,000 revenue increases anticipated from building and septic compliance. There's been some decreases that we wanted to point out, $19,000 decrease in provincial gas tax funding for transit, and $13,000 decrease in grant funding for the community health clinic, the Annex. We have a couple more at about $36,000 in property tax penalty revenue, and $85,000 to be used for the facility or building inventory and condition assessment project, which is a one-time item in 2024 and will help build the asset management plan and guide further budgets for facilities across the organization, which is proposed to come from the CCBF funding.
I will just note too that the detailed listing of all those revenues and expenses are found on starting on page 18 of the budget package. So if you are looking to go back and look at those, they're all listed there. So as noted earlier, one of the primary factors contributing to the increase in the overall increase is the expenses, which is up by $3.3 million and is made up of several factors. And as noted previously in the SWB report provided to General Committee in October, there are many factors that impact SWB, most of which have been previously approved by Council and will be discussed on the next slide. It was also noted on the Q3 report presented in November that the overall town may be in a deficit position by the end of the year, and the primary driver being the increased cost of materials and supplies and contracted services. If you look at the average overage of materials and supplies and contracted services for Q3 in 2023, we're looking at around $1.5 million. Some of these items are offset by reserves or other funding, such as general program revenue. One of the biggest factors for the offset is due to the SWB, due to staff vacancies in 2023. So that's why we're showing less of a variance than we would have with these increases. It was also noted in the Q3 report that staff expect the inflationary increases experienced in 2023 to translate into increases in the 2024 budget. So drilling down a little further, specifically in the SWB line, there is an overall increase of around $1.9 million. This chart here provides a breakdown of the overall increase in SWB for the town. The information here was previously provided in the report Corp 2023-60 and has been amended for the following items, which has either been approved since this time by Council or as a result of the statutory changes to employer paid benefits. So the removal of the road patrol position, which was about $110,000, that was taken out. The extension of the committee coordinator position for 6 months, which is offset by reserves. And then to reflect the change in the ops director position to remove the fire component, which is around $17,000. And as well, there's employer paid compensation, which includes changes to the base pay rates, and employer paid benefits have been adjusted. We do now have all the legislated rates for CPP, EI, OMERS, which has had an increase in what was originally brought forward. It is important to note that the increase that you're seeing in the package today is around 17 million 63, and what was presented in the draft was 17 million, so it is fairly close. So when you look at both materials and supplies and contracted services, overall, you're looking at an increase of about 1.5 million. There are several shifts between where items were budgeted, so you will see items move between the, move from a materials and supply line to a contracted services line, and that's just to accommodate the changes in the categories. So for example, if we had items that were budgeted to be done in-house in 2023, and now we're doing them as a contracted services, they would move from one item to the other. Also included in the total amounts for 2024 are other one-time items that total approximately $300,000. And these are funded through reserves or under other funding sources, such as the $51,000 for the development charge consulting, which was previously approved by council to proceed in 2024. $85,000 for building facility inventory and condition assessment project. Artist fees for Kent Park, which is $50,000, and fleet monitoring or GPS system for $48,000, all funded through the capital replacement reserves. Although these account for the increase in the overall year-to-year amount, these one-time projects are funded from reserves funds and would, if removed, would not decrease the levy. It would just reduce the amount that we were taking from reserves. Another item to note is the non-annual reoccurring item, which is the roads needs study, which is done every 4 years, which is scheduled to be done in 2024 for an amount of $70,000 and is currently being funded through the levy. Other significant items to note that are impacting the overall net levy increase are the significant increase in the operations and protective services divisions in both the materials and supplies and contracted services of approximately $650,000, most of which of those expenses are not offset by revenues or reserves. As well, MAT projects scheduled for 2024 are higher than in the prior year by about $410,000, mainly due to expected costs of the wayfinding signage. And it should be noted that all MAT projects are funded from the MAT funds, and if not spent, would just remain in those reserves. The line for debt is made up of the schedule debenture payments for both principal and interest. And in the budget, we're looking at overall decrease in the amount paid, and that's mainly due to the debenture for the Theatre Civic Center ending in 2023. So that's why you'll see a reduction there. And I've just added the table so you could see what amounts were remaining, or the payments were included in the budget. So the next significant variance is with operating reserves. So overall, the town is expecting to increase the reserve contributions by $188,000. Whereas in 2023, the budget used a net 83 from reserves. And again, this is primarily due to the Safe Restart funding or the COVID funding money that was used as a one-time reserve transfer to offset the levy. And there's also an increase in the amount coming from reserves for MAT projects, an increase in the amount going into the reserve for MAT because of an increase in the revenues, $50,000 coming from the reserves for the Kent Park art project, and a decrease in the working funds reserve primarily due to the one-time project in 2023 for the strategic plan. There's also a reduction in the amount coming from the human capital reserve by $167,000. So capital overview. So it's important to remember that there's two components of the capital budget. First is the capital project plan or the capital expense. This is the amount that we actually pay for projects or purchased capital items. This could include like the reconstruction of a road or the purchase of a fire pumper. The second component is the capital contribution or the capital levy. This is the amount that we contribute to the overall capital reserves, which are being used to fund capital expenses from year to year. There is no direct correlation on an annual basis of the two amounts. Depending on the timing of the replacement of capital, the capital could be higher in 1 year compared to the capital levy and vice versa. So we just wanted to refresh everybody's memory, just because it's been a while, and how we arrived at the targets for the capital contributions or the capital levy. We first need to look at the total replacement of all the assets or group of assets. Then we take the estimated useful life, which is the amount of years we would expect to be able to use that asset before we'd have to rehabilitate it or replace it. And dividing these numbers gives us the annual recommended contribution. This is the amount that we should be targeting to set aside each year to fund the eventual replacement of each of our assets. Currently, the town is funding the recommended annual contribution to get to a sustainable level of funding in approximately 20 years. Oh, in 20 years. And we're in year 15 of 20. Capital assets are essential to the town to provide the programs and services that the community requires and enjoys. So we're trying to think of a way to also demonstrate this. So just think of a capital contribution plan as like a savings account for capital project expenses. In personal finance, this would be similar to a vehicle or a home repair fund that you would expect to contribute every month to save up for expected or unexpected car or home repair bills. And it is important to note that reducing the expenses in one given year does not reduce the levy. So 2024 has been proposed to be somewhat of an anomaly for our capital spend, as the projects are proposed are much higher than compared to 2023 and in prior years. And this is primarily due to the fact that many of the projects were deferred in 2023 due to contractor availability and key staff positions that were vacant throughout the year. The detailed listing of all the projects can be found on Appendix C and D, and we've gone through those in a previous report, so we won't go through those again in detail. It's also expected, and was noted in the Q3 report, that the amount we expect to utilize from reserves in 2023 will be a lot lower than what was budgeted. So essentially what that means is that if the project's deferred, the funding was also deferred. So it just moves the project expense and the funding from 1 year to the next. And again, these delays do not have an impact on the overall net levy from year to year. The main driver of the net levy is the amount of infrastructure that we own and must maintain, and the related costs to replace or rehabilitate that infrastructure. So overall, the net levy increase for capital is recommended at around $800,000. And again, Huntsville has been actively increasing the levels of funding for infrastructure throughout the annual budget process, recognizing that the funding is provided for in the levy each year is less than what is required. Annual increases are included in draft budgets, and past councils have been recognizing and supported this initiative to reduce the funding gap over a period of approximately 20 years. And again, Huntsville's in year 5 of this 20-year plan, not 15. So the scheduled $800,000 scheduled increase that's included in the budget is made up of the $612,000 that was originally proposed, plus $50,000 to start funding for the Medill facility, and an additional $138,000 for a sustainable, to increase our level of funding for capital over the 20-year plan. It is really important to note that 78% of this increase is attributed to roads. The total inventory of roads based on 2019 values is estimated at $150 million. which results in an annual requirement of $15 million. As you can see in the draft budget, there is $4.6 million dedicated to roads, which represents about 30% of what we should be setting aside for roads and other road infrastructure. So next, we'll look at what this proposed budget means to the taxpayer in 2024. So when you factor in the operating and capital impacts to the town levy, the impact for a property assessed at $300,000 would be a total of $1,479, or a change of $196 per year. The $300,000 value is being used as MPAC is currently using the 2016 numbers, so I just want to remind everybody why we're using that number. And using these values of $300,000 would represent an average assessment on a home in Huntsville at the 2016 rates. So when you take into account the District of Muskoka, they're looking at an increase of approximately $33 per year based on the draft rate, and Huntsville's assumed rate of growth of 2.4%. The education rates we're assuming are not going to change in 2024, as they have not changed in the past several years. So just to look at specifically the town portion, so the town budget is set annually and must be balanced. This means that every dollar required for municipal services must be raised. Huntsville keeps a portion of the funds raised through property tax, with the remaining distributed to other services such as the school boards, and district services including water, sewer, and waste collection. And so looking specifically at the town portion of the 1,479, we thought this was an important chart to show where your tax dollars are being spent. So the amounts per year are all listed here, are all for operational expenses, with the exception of the first line, which is funding for ongoing capital costs. So this is the funding for the capital levy discussed earlier, and it's essential for funding to support the town's assets such as roads, bridges, sidewalks, facilities, playgrounds, parks, and trails. And that's that $455 of your total tax bill would go to capital costs. And you'll see down below the next one being roads, sidewalks, bridges, and storm systems, which is the next largest ones, and community services for the next. Overall, when you factor in operating and capital, approximately 65% of your taxes collected are used for operations and protective services. For those services including fire and emergency services, roads, storm, streetlights, sidewalks, and parks and cemeteries. So just to recap the year-over-year changes, we have provided this information which explains the various changes and rates discussed throughout the budget process. So the assessment increase is the amount of real growth that the town has experienced year over year, and it's primarily related to new builds, as there has not been a market assessment in several years, and we're still using the 2016 values. So when you factor this increase in the assessment base with the year-over-year change in the budget, or the net levy increase, you arrive at the Huntsville tax rate change. This is currently estimated at 15.26%. And when you factor in other components of the tax bill, such as district services and education, the estimated impact on the tax bill would be 8.55% over the prior year.
We will now review each of the divisional areas. Again, it should be noted that the divisional summaries can be found in Appendix A in the budget report, and the detailed budgets found in Appendix B, which provides detailed look at each of the division, the changes within, and both summary and line by line. Before we get to the first division, we wanted to provide a high-level overview that demonstrates where the changes are by division, the $3.5 million. The highest being operations, which accounts for over 35% of the net levy increase, and then followed the capital contributions. We'll now have David Tremblay, the CEO and Chief Librarian, speak briefly on some highlights from the library budget proposed and expected in 2024.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank and welcome to the room on behalf of the Library Board, Robert Green, and Board Chair Ray Love. I'll be brief and quick because I know this is going to be a long day. Libraries are one of the most effective and impactful uses of public funding. Strong libraries equal strong communities. Huntsville Public Library helps ensure that all Huntsville residents have access to broadband internet, authoritative information, technology, tools, and services needed to help our community thrive. The challenges had in 2023 by HPL were in staffing transitions with leaves and our book/materials vendor, which was a not-for-profit, filing for dissolution. We have since found another vendor and are in the final stages of working with them to transition. And for the further challenges on the staffing front is the need for a full-time marketing website position. It is currently done by 2 capable staff members who do it off the side of their desks with competing primary duties they have, and they do it as best they can. But as we've seen, digital marketing and social media and websites are increasingly essential and take a significant amount of time and effort. The 2024 budget does not address this, and we will work with the town HR department in 2024 to bring a position forward for the 2025 budget. Libraries are also known for doing more with less, which HPL is no stranger to, and the 2024 budget has been kept to a minimum to assist the town and council in this budgeting process. Our most significant increases outside of SWB come directly from our e-resources and software vendors, which are inflationary and out of our control unless the service is technically cut. So with that short little bit there, and the other mention is, and you'll see in the slide, is the restoration of the travel and accommodation budget for staff conferences and that kind of thing, which was cut during the pandemic and has not been restored. But I would like to, at this point, like to thank you all on behalf of the library for your time and the great working relationship we have with the municipality, and was wondering if there's any questions at this point in time on the library's budget.
Okay. I will open it up to questions. Any question from committee for Mr. Tremblay? Pretty straightforward. Okay, thanks for presenting that, David.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
The next area we will look at is operations and protective services. So we have a pie chart here which shows out of the total $22.9 million levy proposed in the 2024 draft consolidated budget, operations and protective services is $8.2 million. This pie chart shows how that is split between the different departments which within operations and protective services. You can see that roads, not surprising, makes up the largest part of this pie chart, followed up by parks and fire. The balance of the division is split between the director's office and operations, transit, and fleet. A note about the change in the director's office for operations and protective services. There was an increase in this, includes costs for the director, both the SWB and associated costs directly with the director's office. The largest change in 2024 is a reallocation of the administrative coordinator in operations to the director's office line. I believe we have Brandon who's going to have give a quick overview, high level of some changes and highlights.
Good morning. So through your worship, we're going to just touch base on some high-level stuff of our capital operating. I will touch base on the parks and trails, and we'll most likely call upon Shane to talk about fleet, as he's got some important information in there as well. So what we'll do is we'll start with the capital. So what we're proposing in the capital budget is a lot of maintenance on our high-cost items this year. So we got some road reconstructions on Cora Street as well as Minerva Street. So again, those are full road reconstruction, new sidewalks, storm sewers, that type of stuff. We are looking at rehabilitation of two major structures that we have in Huntsville. One is the Williamsport Road Bridge. The other one is the Old North Road Bridge. With that, we're also proposing to ditch 12.7 kilometers out of 315 kilometers that need to be ditched. Proposing 5.8 kilometers of road resurfacing, which is your high float, out of 315 kilometers that require high float. We're proposing to slurry seal 8 kilometers of roads that'll finalize the high float process. So high float was done on that 8 kilometers this year. This slurry seal is to seal the road and close the books on that. We're also looking at 2 carryover projects. So we have a big one on Meadow Park from Scott Street to Cliff Street. That's with the district, so that will be under construction for the summer of 2024, as well as the remaining work left on Anthony Court. So that's what we're looking for there. We'll switch to the operating budget. Some of the high things that we have here is an increase in our line painting, an increase in our sweeping, and an increase in contracted services for dust control. Those costs are just inflations that gone up, as well as added requests, whether it be through council or through public service requests. So as we do receive those requests, they do have an impact on the budget, and so that's why we're asking that increase there. Materials and supplies, we're looking to increase some of the line items that we see are most commonly used: road-based repairs. You've got culvert repairs, sidewalk maintenance, so you'll see some minor increases in there. It's nowhere near where we need to be, but it is a step forward in the right direction. And we'll move towards parks and trails. Some of the high things that you'll see in the proposed budget is the Macaulay Robertson Diamond F street light, or not street lights, sorry, but diamond lights, as well as some upgrades to some of your parks, as well as we're looking at, where'd it go here? The Utterson tennis courts, stuff like that. So they're in your report, but some are to be accessibility, some are rehabilitation, and some are replacement that's in there. And from that, I will have Shane just come down and speak to Fleet.
And Brandon, if you could stick around, I'm sure there might be some questions. Should we ask Brandon, do you want to answer some questions first, and then we'll have Shane come down? Would that be okay? Because it looks like Mayor Alcock might have a question for you.
Yeah.
So Shane, you're up soon. All right.
Very quick.
Mayor
Thank
Alcock,
you.
go
Thank
ahead.
you, Chair Morrison, and thank you, Brandon. Very quick. I think I asked you this before, but of course I've forgotten. Year over year, we add the number of kilometers to our municipal roads, and I wonder if you have a ballpark how much we've added to. I think at one point we had 424 kilometers we were responsible for. I might be wrong in that, but do you have, let's say in the last few years, what the addition might be?
Absolutely, through your worship. So in 2020, we had 412 kilometers of roads that we maintain. Since then, we're sitting at about 420,
So we've added 8.
roughly. Yeah.
Okay, in 4 years. Okay, that's great. I have one other, if that's okay. With respect to the projects going forward and how we fund various projects, I get we fund it from the reserves. You mentioned sidewalks, and we're doing some work on sidewalks. And sidewalks would certainly be related to development, and so therefore development charges. The funding for those, would that come from our DC reserve or the capital reserve? And the next layer of that is maintaining those sidewalks. If we're redoing them or something like that, which is another capital project, how would that be funded? Sorry,
If you want,
Brandon.
yeah, no.
I noticed Julia's stepping right in, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but while you mentioned sidewalks, so I had to go there. Thanks.
I was just going to, note on page 207 of the budget, the budget document, that we have allocated $127,500 from development charges for Howland Drive for those sidewalk projects.
Thank you for that. And so would that be, for the Howland Drive, which is fantastic, would we do that as a rule for any other sidewalk that we're doing, or is it just that particular project out of development charges? Because wouldn't they all be kind of related?
Yeah, we can certainly year to year look at that, taking funds out. I don't believe we have any other sidewalk projects in the budget.
Would there be trail projects that would be similar, that's a similar intent, that they are development related, that we could take from development charge reserve as opposed to capital? And I promise that's my last question at this point. Sorry, Chair Morrison.
I just want to make sure I give you the right answer.
Okay. Do you,
Yeah.
we can wait?
Nope.
Okay.
So if you look at page 210, we also have several parks projects that are funded from development charges. So this includes the Macaulay Robertson project, there's 44,000. The skateboard park, there's 8,500. The Port Sydney basketball court, 18,000, and the Utterson tennis courts, 3,800. As well as the River Mill washroom for 72,000.
Perfect. All
But in the
coming from
future, if we
GCs.
did have, trail projects, we could certainly take outdoor recreation development charges for those, for a portion of them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Julia, on that. Thank you for the questions, Mayor Alcock. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can only spend a certain portion, 50% of the project. Is that what the number is? Can be used for DCs? And they have to be growth, so replacing a sidewalk wouldn't really fit, but a new sidewalk would. Okay, yeah. Any other questions for Brandon while he's here before we hand off to Shane or Mr. Taylor? I have one quick question, Brandon, just for clarification for people. We know that the cost of roads has gone up significantly. I believe I heard the number, a certain distance used to be $1 million, now it's 1.6. Is that correct? Would that be that 60% increase in cost of roads?
Through your worship, absolutely. We're seeing a per kilometer of high float last year was 90,000. We're looking at 156,000 this year. So, and we're seeing that across the board on multiple resurfacing projects.
And I bring that up because just for us to maintain what we have is next to impossible with the current funding, right? So just something to consider. Okay, and back over to Mayor Alcock. She said that was her last question, but.
No, I promised. And I break
Promises are made to be
promises
broken.
there,
You're
yeah,
good.
Exactly. But you inspired the correct me if I'm wrong, I think you've changed the contingency for your projects going forward. And what is the number that you're using for your contingency?
Through your worship, 30%.
Which is much higher than we've done in the past.
That's correct.
What was it in '23?
5%.
Whoa, right? That's substantial.
Based on lessons learned, right?
Yeah.
And how hard it is to cost anything now.
Okay.
Over to Councillor Stone.
Thank you. Last year, we deferred 2.3 million, I think, in projects from operations. And you mentioned the work that we're planning on doing this year. Are we anticipating to do all of that work that we didn't do last year as well?
Through your worship, that's correct. So out of that 2.3, 1.6 of that was for Meadow Park. So that is, right now, there'll be a report coming to council in the new year based on tender results to move forward with that project in the construction. So the construction is slated to start early spring. So that would be done. Anthony Court is to be scheduled to be done next spring too, as well as the works that we're proposing under the 2024 capital are to start in the spring under contract.
Thank you very much for that.
Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair. Quick question about tendering projects. I know we're always late when we're dealing with the budget deliberations, et cetera. Are you ready to go out with tenders right away, like prior to the budget being approved? I know that sometimes we get better deals going out early than waiting till late January, February to start to send them out. So I just wonder where you are in that process.
Through your worship, so I just advertised 3 tenders this week and last week. The remaining tenders that we have, so there's 2 already with the district that have already been out. We're under contract. The bridge work that we're doing has already gone out for tender. The street lights have gone out for tender. The bridge rehabilitations, they'll be going out next week. And then we have the rest of our work, such as high float, possibly ditching. We're looking at joint venturing with the district on the Muskoka-wide contract, so any of that slurry seal going back with the district. So that takes a little bit of the burden off the staff and overseen by the district, so there should be no issues with getting tenders out.
On another subject, with the roads need study coming up in '24, I'm just wondering, is there any advantage to not doing some of the roads that have been listed here and waiting till that report comes through? Because I think the last one was $70 million, a roads need study, and I think we did 3/4 of the roads then. So I'm just curious, should we wait until we see that so we can adjust or reset our road projects, or is it better just to go ahead?
To your worship, so the roads that we are proposing, they're in dire need of work. To postpone that and to see what the results could have a negative effect on us, not knowing how they're going to prioritize the roads that are out there. These ones have been identified through council, through public service requests, through road patrol. They're the ones that are in dire need, so I think they do need to move forward. But we will need to wait to see what happens in that study as well.
Thank you. Any other questions around the table? So I think, Brandon, you're off the hook for now. You might have to come back later, and we'll bring up Mr. Taylor to do the fleet report. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'll just give a brief overview as to the reason why we are increasing the fleet side of things. Basically, just short and sweet, is due to our, for better words, lack of a preventive maintenance program that we have on the public works side is the reason why we are asking for more. Due to the reason our mechanics can't keep up to what we have for breakdowns and the preventive maintenance side. So yes, we are having to put, I would say probably 50%, if not more right at the moment, to third-party individuals to fix our equipment. I know we did ask for a third mechanic. It did get declined, which is fine, but we will be asking for it probably for the next year or so. With that, I think that will help our situation immensely. We are also working to get our mechanics to their EVT license, which is a emergency vehicle technician, which will also help us on the fire side. Because at the moment, we're paying, for instance, if we have a $200 part, we're paying $1,000 just for the individuals to come up and put the part on. So basically, that, in a nutshell, is kind of the reason why we're asking for that increase into the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any questions for Shane on the fleet increase? Councillor Renwick?
Thank you, Chair Morrison. Thank you, Shane. So we're looking at the contracted services of $183,000 for 2024. That's the number that you're talking about.
Yes.
Because we don't have the additional mechanic to do the work.
Yes.
So if we had that mechanic, that number obviously would go down.
That
but
would,
then-
yes, sorry, through you, Worship. Yes, it would would decline, but we would still have to, there is still a portion of the repairs that will have to still go through third party. But yes, it would drop down
Right.
the costing.
But then, if I may, just on the flip side, that your salaries, benefits, and wages would go up because you've got another staff person in there. So I'm wondering what the difference would be in increasing your staff level by one or decreasing this contracted services. And that may be, sorry? Yeah.
Sorry? No. Sorry, carry on. I was trying to keep up to the.
Yeah. And this may be, it may be a little bit too detailed, but I guess my question is, if you hire somebody, how much are you going to save on the contracted services side of things if you do hire a mechanic versus, what we have right now? So I don't expect you to know all the numbers in your head. Maybe Julia knows that, but that's something that maybe that we'd have to look at.
I think our CEO will jump in quickly, and then Shane can answer.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. So we can bring that information back for the next budget discussions. If there's an interest in us bringing that example back, a staff versus a contracted position, what that looks like, we can bring that back to the next discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a great question as well. Having something in-house, obviously a big benefit to your team, right?
Yes.
So I think that's something definitely to look into. Awesome. Thank you, Councillor Renwick.
Thanks, Chair Morrison. Good question, Councillor Renwick. I was going to ask the same question. You talked about accreditation for working on emergency service vehicles.
Yes.
Currently, we don't have that accreditation, so we can only work on operations vehicles.
Currently, through you. On the fire side, our third-party mechanics and whatnot on the fire side can only work from from the chassis, from the truck side forward. Our mechanics can't work from the chassis back when it comes to all the intricate parts of the fire truck itself. So having an EVT on board would benefit, I think, because a lot of our issues that we're having is on the EVT side of things. The operations of the truck, that's not a problem. We're not having issues with that. It's just, for lack of a better word again, from the back side of the truck.
So just to follow up to that, Chair Morrison, so we're looking for EVT training for 2 mechanics plus potential of a 3rd mechanic, or am I correct in that?
Through you. Currently, this process will probably be a 3-year program. We're not going to have our 1 mechanic license because there is 4 portions to this. So we will, in a perfect world, yes, 3 would be perfect, but we would like to have at least 1 that's EVT licensed.
Starting with 1, okay.
Yeah.
So when we do bring something back, those costs will be associated with the report, please and thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Great question as well. Any other questions around the table for Shane? Good. Deputy Mayor Armour, yes.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one. I noticed in fleet that material and supplies, there's an increase of $60,000. Is that, can you explain why it's $60,000 for that?
Through you, I would have to be honest with you, look at that, but I can get back to you on that. Get that question for you. Yep.
Thank you, Shane. All right, and thanks for all the clarification. That's great information for us.
Thank you.
And I think that's it for fleet. We'll pass it back on to Julia and Suzanne to go to the next department.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shane.
Next, we're going to look at community services. So this part, out of the $22.9 million levy proposed in 2024 draft consolidated budget, community services is $3.8 million of the proposed operating budget. This pie chart shows how that $3.8 million is split between the different departments within community services. So you can see that facilities makes up a majority of that budgeted amount, at about 70%. This includes most of the town facilities, from the Civic Center to the Summit Center, community halls, and so on. Director Babineau will speak briefly on some of the highlights and give an overview of community services changes.
Good morning. Thank you. Through you, Chair Morrison. The Community Services Division continues to provide a diverse range of inclusive and affordable programs and services that enhance the quality of life and contribute to our community's well-being. These programs and services are delivered in well-maintained recreation and municipal facilities that are positioned for growth and that benefit all. As a team of committed staff, we foster a healthy and vibrant community. The Community Services 24 budget submission is reflective of a number of items. A focus to maintain the current level of service for programs and services that we currently offer and that our community expects. To strive to deliver an increasing demand due to development growth and growing customer participation and usage. The delivery of council directives like extended season ice. Anticipated and expected increases in revenue based on trends of customer demand, community growth, and participation numbers as well as sales that we saw in 23's Q2 and Q3 reports. And yet to manage the strain on our resources, that to supply these initiatives and amenities, we are subject to significant increased costs, and in such areas as materials and supplies, utilities, contractors, and that is reflected in our submission. The 24 proposed community services capital and operating budgets reflect the current increases to both revenue and expenses, as well as our current staffing resources to deliver. Recently approved strategic plans such as Council's own strategic plan, the Community Services Master Plan, the Waterfront Strategy Brief, and the Algonquin Theatre Business Plan all play a pivotal role in shaping the future vision of the division and the people that we serve. We will continue to strategically invest our resources to be fiscally responsible, and we will report quarterly. And we are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Babineau. Any questions for Director Babineau on community services? We're going to let her off the hook. Oh, lucky you. All right, so let's keep moving.
Okay, on to development services. So out of the $22.9 million levy proposed in the 2024 draft consolidated budget, development services is about $1.4 million. This pie chart shows how the $1.4 million is split between the different departments within development services. You can see that marketing makes up a majority of the budgeted amounts at about 33%. This includes marketing services for both internal and external parties of the town. I wanted to point out here in the detail budget appendix, there's some adjustment to the allocation of the director's costs with related increases in internal transfers to offset that. For the pie chart here, there are two areas that show up as a zero. I wanted to point out here, they show up as a zero because there are self-funded areas within the town. So that's the building department and also short-term rental licensing. So we will have Director Maxwell give brief highlights from her division.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. The budget is roughly the same as previous years. Some of the things that we're hoping to do next year from a bylaw perspective would be continuing our bylaw reviews and updates and implementing a new software that will help track complaints and enforcement in a more streamlined fashion, the costs of which would be split with the short-term rental program and the building program as we do enforcement in all three areas. For the building department, there is an upcoming new Ontario building code that is going to have to be implemented, and so there will be some potential changes to the building program based on that. And building's also looking at how they can most effectively close older building permits to help limit the town's liability. Short-term rental, we're going to continue with short-term rental licensing and enforcement. We've been very successful this year, and the 24-hour hotline that council approved in July is coming into play shortly, any day now, hopefully. Planning is looking at ongoing implementation of the community planning permit, as well as integrating cloud permit for planning applications. Economic development, we are looking at the largest change, I think, through the MAT budget with the implementation of the wayfinding strategy and getting as much of those wayfinding signs done as possible next year, as well as implementing the economic development strategy, community branding, and working on continued physician recruitment. Marketing and communications is looking at implementing the corporate communication strategy and continuing marketing support for all of our departments and our assets, as well as assisting with the wayfinding too. Some of the changes in the marketing department specifically relate to the fact that the Forester no longer has a print version of the newspaper that's free and available to the public. So we're looking at trying to do some other methods of communicating what the town is doing over the next year. Challenges, we've seen significant increases in requests for service in all areas. And the current economic climate, we don't really know if anything is going to change from a building and planning perspective, but we're anticipating that there will still be significant amounts of inquiries that we'll be dealing with. We are constantly looking at ways to ensure that our resources are being expended in the most efficient manner to best service the public while maintaining our existing and legislated service levels. And a focus for me next year as well will be looking at our affordable housing program and what we can do in order to help with the housing issues that we've seen. And all of the managers are here to help with any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Maxwell. I'll pass it on to Mayor Alcock with a question.
Thank you, Chair Morrison, and thank you, Director Maxwell, for that overview. That was fantastic. Very quick question, and I apologize, I don't have the number in front of me, but when I went through the numbers, I recall that I think we're proposing to spend about $247,000 on more implementation of the wayfinding strategy, which is very exciting. I'm so excited about the wayfinding. But my question is, I'm wondering how realistic that is, given that we just approved the first phase, which was $47,000, and that we're expecting full implementation, I think, by the spring of that. So I'm wondering how, if we've got plans in place already where we're anticipating an additional $247,000 spend in 2014. And I know that's out of reserve, but I'm just curious about the delivery.
Okay, Director Maxwell, you want to answer that?
Through you to the worship, Your Worship. The MAP project, the wayfinding, as we know, has been ongoing for many years now. And with the recent proposal that we had the quote for the cost of the signs plus installation, we felt that it was a good opportunity, if the prices seem to be relatively reasonable, that we will try and get as much done as we feasibly can next year, with the hope that we would get it completed. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Maxwell. And Councillor Schumacher.
Thank you, through you, Chair Morrison. So the library CAO mentioned that they're wanting to ask for a marketing person in 2025. I guess my question is, how can our internal marketing that is in the Development Services Department help the library? Is there a possibility, or is it a different marketing strategy altogether?
I think it was a lot to do with website development and stuff too, right? So, Director Maxwell.
Thank you. Our marketing department does assist where feasible with what happens with the library and further promoting their messaging, et cetera. However, if we were looking at doing anything significant, we would have to see what that looks like and what that would entail for the town's portion. I know that anything that would implement their strategy, we would probably be trying to assist with them in any way possible. If there was any software or anything involved, that we would want to investigate that more fully too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, just thank you for that. Maybe just if we could find something a little more along the collaboration, that would be great.
Okay. CEO Corey.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. So our first course of action would always be to see if we could do something in collaboration. So that would always be a first step, and determine if we had capacity with our existing resources to assist, and if not, we could rejig, but we would always look at that as a first option. Yeah.
Sounds good. And it sounds like any kind of help for our CEO of the library would be beneficial, right? His staff are overworked. Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question. I know you've already answered this for myself, but in case somebody notices it, the $9,000 new item in bylaw. Can you explain what that's for?
Absolutely, thank you. It's a recovery item, so if bylaw enforcement requires any hiring of contractors to go and, say, for example, clean yards, clean up a property, the costs associated with that end up being added onto the tax bill if the property owner doesn't pay them. So it is a recovery item that we just haven't been budgeting for necessarily the same way previously.
All right. Any other questions around the table? All right. Thank you, Director Maxwell and your team. And we'll go to the next department.
Sorry, just while we're on development services, we just wanted to also show the schedule of the MAT tax projects. So these are actually listed on on page 238 and Appendix E to the budget document. So the MAT budget's a little bit different because we do have to present the projects that we're going to do year to year. So we just wanted to make sure that this was presented. So it's an easy to understand list for the community. I also just wanted to note, because I've been asked several times about the MAT reserve, and we're expecting that at the end of 2023 that the town's MAT reserve will be around 1.18 million. And that at the end of 2024 would be about 1 million. And that's continue with the Hamada payments each year.
Perfect. And moving on.
The next division we'll look at is corporate management. It's comprised of the CAO office, human resources, and corporate and community strategy. So out of the $22.9 million levy proposed in the 2024 draft consolidated budget, corporate services is just under $1 million. This pie chart shows how that $1 million is split between the different departments within corporate services. One thing to note is that there was some adjustments to the allocations of staff time between the Office of the CAO and Legislative Services, which is why there is an increase in salaries, wages, and benefit line within the CAO office. CAO Corey will give a brief overview of highlights included in the 2024 corporate management proposed budget.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morrison. So I will just do a high-level overview from the Office of the CAO. So I'd like to identify some of the challenges that we have today and what we'll be expecting tomorrow and years to come. As all of you are very much aware, the community does continue to grow. Between 2014 and 2021, we've seen 11% growth, which is huge for our community. One might say that we're the victims of our own success, but it is a great news story, but it still comes with the need to adjust to that growth. We do continually see needs change, especially over the past few years, and a prime example is within our Community Services Division. An example of that is we've seen registration up by 11%, which is, again, a fabulous news story, but again requires resources and finances to support that. We have a lot of external factors that do have a strong presence within our organization. The big thing is our economic climate, as all of you know, whether we're sitting in our living rooms looking out or sitting at our desk within our organization, it has a huge impact on how we operate and how we function. An example of that is inflation increases are 4.75% between 2021 and 2023. And that's a huge difference from 1.66, which was between 2018 and 2020. As noted previously by individuals doing presentations, the cost of materials have increased substantially. Example, as Brandon noted this morning, 44 to 65% cost to build a road, and line painting alone just between 21 and 23. We are definitely not immune to these factors, and we are feeling them no matter where we sit. We're also feeling the pressures of perhaps downloading things such as the municipality's involvement in housing initiatives. We're feeling the pressures of climate change, and we're feeling the pressures of the need for community health care. These are things that are outside of typical municipal operations. These are things that would not have been there 10 years ago, that we're now trying to figure out how we pay for and how we can support in our community. I do feel really confident and very excited that we do have a new strategic plan that is almost finalized, out for public consultation on the final draft. I can't stress enough how important this document is, and I know all of you know that, in order to help guide us to deal with these ongoing changes within our community, whether they're within our control or not. A few things that I will highlight with my budget, which is fairly small considered to some of the budgets you've seen presented earlier. In an effort to try to help reduce the costs, I have decreased my consulting budget by $10,000, just looking at previous years and what's been spent. And as noted earlier, there's been a slight realignment with staffing resources, so no change to the overall impact, just a change that will show up on the pie chart. So for the next year and the remaining term of council, my focus as your Chief Administrative Officer is obviously to ensure that the directives given by council are met to the best of our ability. It's also my job to let you know if the directives that are given are not sustainable with the current resources that we have, whether it's human capital or financial. It is my job to make sure that council's aware of that. So I certainly will be committed for the next year in the remaining term of council to make sure we meet the directives that are given to us by council. I also have the pleasure of presenting on behalf of the other two areas within the corporate management. The next one is human resources. There's no question that we do have some challenges in this area, and it's a result of changes to legislation, increased levels of services and programs. Again, it's a bittersweet. It's great for our community, but requires resources. And the need for diverse workforce and specialized positions. We're seeing this again with changing legislation. As a service organization, we rely hugely on our team to deliver the services. Without the team that we have, the town of Huntsville, the services would not be able to be provided. So super important to rely on that human component. We do need the human capital to support the levels of service within our community. Sorry, I just scrolled up way too quickly on my notes. And the other thing that we are experiencing, and this is not uncommon across municipalities, certainly within Ontario, if not across the country, is employee burnout. We're seeing labor shortages. We're seeing people retiring. There's a huge knowledge gap that we're trying to fill. So that's a huge issue that we're experiencing within the human resource area. And we need to be competitive even within our region. We're constantly competing with other municipalities, and if we're not the employer of choice, then we're not going to be very successful with recruiting and retaining. So on a happy note, we do have an amazing team in the town of Huntsville. It's not all doom and gloom. We really have an amazing group of people that go out every day and work extremely hard. So we're very fortunate to have them, and I'm extremely proud to lead such an amazing team of people. Operational highlights. So for 2024, we do have some corporate leadership training that was carryover. It is funded from reserve. There will not be an impact on the tax levy, but it was just a matter of getting the timing. And unfortunately, we did have some changes within senior leadership and some changes in our management team. So there wasn't ideal to get that training done. And then we did have some one-time costs with the HR manager overlap because we will have some training that's required because our amazing manager of HR is going to be retiring the end of January. So we need to prepare for her departure. The last area I have is corporate and community strategy. And as noted before, we are seeing significant increases in service levels and expectations along with substantial technological advancements. This is key. It doesn't always have to be additional employees. We can offset the needs and the demands within our community, perhaps sometimes with electronic or programming. So those are the things, the technology advancements that we're looking at. We do have limited resources to be able to provide existing levels of service. And we're also expected to be looking at how can we do things smarter. So not work harder, but do it smarter. So that's one of the challenges that we have is just getting the time to look at what can we do and how can we do it better, just from a time perspective. As the economy, technology, and the workforce, the community needs and expectations change and evolve, and it's necessary to function of a municipality to adapt and take on a more proactive approach to improvement. Extremely important to have a strategy, which I won't touch on because I've mentioned it earlier before, but it is the key document to guide us. And the town's new strategic plan will set the priority areas for this term of council as well as councils beyond, and we'll work toward achieving those goals. And so going forward, any new projects, programs, and services will need to support the vision for the town's future. Quick budget highlights, last two items. It is a newly created division in 2023, so there are no comparative budget figures at this time. You will see a one-time project in the 24 budget that talks about a software for execution. It's an execution tool, and it will actually track, so the strategic plan as well as other plans down the road, but it'll track the strategic plans, the directives, and the status of those directives, as opposed to staff manually entering into an Excel spreadsheet, which takes time and obviously costs money. So we're very excited about that being in the draft budget, and we hope that we can get council support with that item. I do believe that was my presentation, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, CAO Corey, for the update and the report. Any questions for our CAO? Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, and thank you for that overview. That was really, really helpful and really well said. Thank you. I do have a quick question, and that is you made reference to the fact you're dropping your consulting fees under, I think, in your budget area by 10,000. And so I think that leaves 70,000. I'm just curious if what you're thinking is around that. What might be something that would be used for?
I do believe 60,000 of that 70,000 was to do with the study that was approved by council this year to do the monitoring report for the Infrapipe property. So that is committed. So technically there's $10,000. Yeah. Yeah, it's committed. Yeah, thank you.
Great question. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair Morrison. Just a couple of questions under corporate management. So material and supplies, you got an increase of 3,700, but we only spent 67 of the 87,000 K. Perfect.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chair. So largely the reason that a bunch of that hasn't been spent in 2023 was because of one-time projects. So 10,000 of that was the corporate training that our CIO had mentioned. So it was to be funded through a reserve in 2023. So it wasn't in the levy in 2023. And it's been carried forward to 2024. So that 10,000 hasn't been spent. I do believe also that there are some invoices that aren't reflected in the actuals yet. And that is anticipated to be spent before the end of the year. There's also a new division in that, materials and supplies, so things like a cell phone, professional development, that kind of stuff is in there for 2024, which was not reflected in the 23 budget.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Back to you guys.
Sorry, if it's okay, I just wanted to jump back to operations and protective services just for a minute. Just to respond to some questions. So we did have the question about the $60,000 for materials and supplies. So that's actually an increase in the fleet repairs and maintenance line item. And that's related to what historically has been spent for parts costs in that area. So it's just putting that number to what's typically been spent. And to ensure that we have a good preventative maintenance program going forward. The other just discussion that we had was about the mechanic. And at this point, what we had recommended is that we look at that mechanic position in 2024 to propose it in 25, just because they're trying to get organized with their preventative maintenance program, just get things organized before we add that additional staff. So, I mean, we can certainly look at it, but I would recommend that we bring it forward as a 2025 item.
Yep, that makes sense.
One other thing, we missed one important person, our fire chief, who we neglected to give an overview on his budget as well. So I apologize.
Unbelievable. Thanks, Julia. Good morning, Council. I'll give you a quick overview of what I look after. So obviously, I look after the fire side, I look after the emergency management, I look after the regional training center. So we don't have a whole lot of changes on the regional training center, the emergency management side, other than we all know that there are the extreme weather events are becoming more and more as the years go on. So no increase to the emergency management. We have scheduled some training for a lot of our members through the EMO, but it's all free training, so that's a bonus for us. The regional training center is self-funded. So we are running approximately 14 courses, or we have them scheduled 14 courses in the RTC, and they are funded through the Ontario Fire Marshal's office. So if the courses don't run, it's no cost to the town. So that's so there is there's nothing increased in the budget as far as for the regional training center. As far as fire, we do have a number on the capital side. We do have a couple of items, and a lot of this has to do with going back to what the fleet manager was talking about. We do have a couple of apparatus that are aged and are required replacement, and we do have a pumper tanker that is scheduled that was advanced tendered. I know I brought a report back in May for that truck. and we have a rescue, which was a ambulance that we had got from the district a number of years ago, and it's past due, and is actually, I'd like to report that it's sitting at the back of our fire station right now. It's not working, so we're in a bit of a spot right now, so we are using the deputy chief's vehicle down in Port Sydney. So thank you for allowing us to get the rescue. Other than that, we have a couple of another emergency response vehicle. This is we had to go to the emergency. We had to go to the truck because of the we were using SUVs, and health and safety reason. When our investigators went out to calls, they were putting contaminated gear inside of vehicles, and obviously it's a health and safety issue because of all the contaminants coming off, and the driver was breathing in all that contaminants. So we've gone to trucks, and we're eliminating our SUVs. Other than that, on the operating side, I know there was there's some increase. Obviously, again, it goes back to the equipment and repairs and maintenance. It was a big year last year, and it's going to be another big year this year, where a lot of our SCBA cylinders are requiring hydrostating. A lot of our equipment needs to be maintained. So we're hoping that this will get us caught up, and we can start getting on more of a program. But I am willing to answer any questions.
Okay.
Be free
Any
to forget about
questions on the protective services side? Deputy Mayor Emmer?
Thanks, Chair Morrison. Gary, under the regional training, I see it's a zero budget at the end of the day. It's just cost recovery. Do we anticipate any need to replace anything there? Should we be building any capital plans for that and charging back to the other municipalities that are using it?
So through you, Chair Morrison, so we are making the RTC a more attractable, or attracting for other municipalities. We've now added an air filling station down there. We have the live fire containers. We have water supply, and we have had a lot of interest from other municipalities to come down. The Deputy Chief Clay right now is finalizing the agreement. That was we were instructed to get an agreement at the governance board, so that's being completed right now. So that will be available, and that should attract a lot more municipalities to come and use the facility. However, and maybe Julia could speak more to this, so when we do have run courses, there is revenue. So Julia could probably explain that it does go into the infrastructure, but we haven't had a lot of courses running. We're starting to gain now, and once that gets used, the facility will have to start, replacing things. So maybe Julia could.
Yeah, I can just add to that the intention is that any extra revenue that does get generated, or net revenue that gets generated through the RTC, will go into capital reserves. So that's why it nets out to zero. Any extra funding does go into the reserve for capital for fire.
Okay, follow up?
Yeah. So I understand the repair and maintenance aspect of it, but now I know this isn't up to date, but under the wages, we've got an increase of $38,000 for part-time, and you've only spent $242,000 to date of a budget of $269,000. So I'm just wondering why the extra $38,000 in there.
I think Julia's going to through, Chair.
I can say that we've been accruing, estimating what the part-time salaries? We've been estimating quarterly what those salaries are expected based on the fire formula. But they're actually paying it out this paycheck, actually, so we'll see the actuals in there shortly. We also did keep a portion of the funds too for mechanical, just due to the fact that Shane has now moved over to Fleet, so there is a backfill that we're using, a part of that savings. So there is no net effect on the levy, but to keep it in the volunteer firefighters budget so that they can allocate some of their time to the mechanical issues.
Thank you. Was Councillor Stone, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. Any other questions for our fire chief? All right. Well, moving on. And I will be saying I'm going to have a bio break right around noon-ish for my own personal needs. Okay.
Okay, next up we have legislative services. So, similar to the other divisions, out of the $22.9 million levy proposed in the 2024 draft consolidated budget, legislative services makes up about $2 million of the proposed operating budget. The pie chart shows how the $2 million is split between the different departments within legislative services. So we have clerks at about $867,000, corporate information, which includes records management, $262,000, information technology at $824,000, and legal and agreements at $95,000. I just wanted to mention that the clerks in this pie chart includes the director's office, clerks, council, and elections. We'll now turn it over to Director Clea to provide a brief overview of her division.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morrison, our four departments are as per on the screen there. Our functions are set out on page 81 of the budget document. In the town's 2023 budget, and the division included agreement for IT shared services with the Township of Lake Bays. In the 2024 budget document for you today, it contains both an expansion of costs covered in the IT shared services agreement, as well as the inclusion of GIS services with the Township of Lake Bays in an equal shared cost model. Shared services provide an opportunity to streamline processes. My screen has just gone to set. Processes to achieve efficiencies and potentially reduce costs by eliminating redundancy. It also allows for specialized focus in specific areas that would be costly for smaller single municipalities to achieve. The division continues to seek and review shared services opportunities that are deemed appropriate. For the Clerk's Department, 2023 and 2024 is an opportunity to catch up on many projects before starting election preparations in 2025. A few operating budget highlights include the increase in legal expenses due mainly to the Integrity Commissioner questions and education provided, as well as access to records requests. The addition of the committee coordinator position in April. The yearly increase of $5,000 a year in election reserve is in preparation of the 226 election budget. This is in preparation of the 226 municipal election, and it's for various software and 4-year growth in population, because the software many times is based on population numbers. An expansion of GIS services with the Township of Lake Bays. We'll see a net increase of $33,400 for 2 additional GIS technicians. The IT budget includes a transfer of software and licensing from other departments to increase oversight and control. The IT department continues to evaluate ways to reduce costs, and as an example, they are moving forward with leasing copiers instead of purchasing them. However, many costs continue to rise, including both software and hardware that are beyond the control of the town and that put a strain on the department's budget. The main challenge for the division is keeping up with growth and demand, as the Legislative Services Division provides support to all divisions. We are many times at the direction and mercy of the timelines and projects that each department has been tasked with by council. They are also usually overlapping and with competing forces. A second challenge to the division is seeing the filling of staff vacancies. The division is continuously learning, adapting, modernizing, and seeking innovation to assist each department and corporation, and thereby council's strategic direction and the community. Thank you, and our managers are here for questions.
Thank you, Director Clea. Any questions from the committee? Deputy Mayor Armour? Yes.
Thanks, Chair Morrison. Thanks, Tanya. I know you touched on the legal fees, but you spent $3,700 of a $3,000 budget and increased it to $17,600. So you're anticipating a busy year, are you, with the Integrity Commissioner?
It's also education for the Integrity Commissioner, but the bulk amount of that is actually, we realigned the amount from council into our directors, so it's like a transfer. It's over $11,000 of that alone. And the other is a bit of an increase in regards to FOIs. The access requests have really increased, and they're complex.
That makes sense. Anything else from committee? Okay, with that, we are right around noon, so I'm going to have a very quick 5-minute break, if that's okay with everybody, and then we'll come back and finish things off. All right. Okay, thank you. I'd like to call this meeting back to order and pass it on to Julia and Suzanne.
So on to financial services. So out of the 22.9 million levy proposed in the draft consolidated budget, financial services makes up just over 400,000 of that proposed budget. And that is because we have a lot of passive revenue included in our budget. This pie chart shows how that 400,000 is split between the different departments within financial services. And you'll see that insurance is one of the largest ones. So 23 highlights. This has been a challenging year for the finance department due to staff turnover, both in the finance division, but even more significant due to turnover across the various divisions of the town. We are a support department, and so we do have to invest a lot of time in training of the new staff to get them up to speed on all of our processes and budgets and that sort of thing. So it is very time consuming, and it does tie up a lot of resources across the various functions. So we're looking forward to hopefully in 2024 having all of staff stay and having an easier year. So just some highlights. Again, just to note that there was a removal of the COVID recovery funding, which was included in the finance budget of 482,000. This was a one-time item in 23 that we did expect to have a significant on the 24 budget. There's one-time DC funding, and that's from funded by reserves for the development charge background study and bylaw, which will be coming forward in 2024, with our bylaw ending at the end of next year. We also have proposed a one-time consulting for building inventory and condition assessment project, and recommending that be funded through the Canada Community Building Fund, which is previously the federal gas tax. And this is to create a better inventory of our buildings and facilities across the town, and also have a good condition rating on each of those so that we've got that information for decision making. There's also a reduction in tax penalties of around 36,000, and that's due to the reduction in the tax receivable balances that we've experienced over the past couple of years. We're looking at increasing the investment or the interest income by over 200,000, and this is due to the increase in interest rates. There's also a reduction in the debenture payments in 2024, and as per our budget and financial controls policy, this transfer, we have a long-term plan that puts that any debentures that fall off, those funds go into capital reserves, and that's around 87,000. For insurance, we have a one-time consulting fee, and this was actually in the 23 budget at a smaller amount, but this is to do all of the buildings, and this is to have an up-to-date building insurance value for each of our facilities, because we haven't done one for probably a decade. We just want to make sure that we've got the right values on those buildings in case of something ever happened. There's also an increase in insurance premiums of 51,000. I know this doesn't seem like a win, but over the past several years, this is a bit of a win for the town. We're finally getting caught up for insurance. We also have an increase in cost recovery from the building department. So each year we take a portion of what the insurance premium is for the year, and we allocate a portion of the building funds to come cover that. So we've actually increased that quite a bit in 2024, and that's to reflect the fact that we were looking previously at a rate of 25%, and we've increased it to 40%, and that's because a lot of our our insurance claims are related to our building department, mainly due to historical claims. So the finance team is looking forward to 2024 and completing several of the projects that have been commenced or will commence in 2024. These include the completion of the property tax online portal, providing more ways for online payments, including working with Cloud Permit for online payment options, as well as some other projects such as the development charge background study. The finance division is also investigating the possibility, and we're kind of excited about it, of providing a multi-year budget and providing recommendations earlier in 2024 to the committee for approval to go ahead with that. And that's all for me, if anybody has any questions.
Mayor Alcock?
Thank you, Chair Morrison, and thank you, Julia. That wonderful going through all of that and for explaining a whole lot of things. One of them, you answered a question of mine, but it triggered another question, and that was the reference to the reduction in the reduction in the debenture payment that we were paying up until this year, 88,000 approximately. And glad to hear that it's being transferred to the capital reserve. That obviously makes a whole lot of sense. So my question would be, the increase that we're proposing on our contribution to the capital reserve, is it in consideration of that increase? Did we consider that we're now adding 88,000 that we didn't last year because of that debenture reduction?
So the intention of that overall program, and we have contemplated that for a large amount of many years, was that it would be in addition to, so it would be the 800,000 plus the 87,000.
May I follow up? Okay, that's really helpful. So when you said the 800,000, so it's actually 880,000 that we're proposing, and that includes the 88. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, good question. Any other questions, Deputy Mayor Armour?
Thanks very much. Through you, Chair. I had a bunch of questions. I think I sent them all to you, so I don't know if you answered them all, but the insurance one, so for them to go out and assess our billings, it's going to cost $16,000? Is that what I got from that? So we get a true assessment of the...
So I believe it's actually, there's one thing that fell off, so it's actually the increase. So we didn't do the project in 2023. We've deferred it to 24, but we've expanded the scope to be all of the buildings. So I believe it's 21,000.
21,000.
And that is to have have a company go out and assess all the buildings for insurance values, which is different than to inventory them for asset management. So we would do it at the same, but it is two different kind of studies that we would combine into one so that we get good value on those ones.
And that would be within that $16,000, or the 21,000?
It would be the 21 plus the 85.
21 plus the 85.
So the 21 is just for the insurance values. The 85 is actually similar to the project that we just did with our trail system, where we had a company inventory all of our trails, GPS them, do conditions, provide pictures, assessments, all that. And that was around $50,000. And buildings are a little bit more complex than that.
Okay.
Councillor Roebuck?
Thank you, Chair Morrison, and thank you, Julia, for the report. It's been mentioned a few times that we do not have the $400,000 in COVID funding, and that we understand that for 2023 going forward. In 2022, I believe there was a $2 million surplus at the end of the fiscal year. Where does that money go? Where did it go? The $2 million that in surplus? I think it was the end of 2022.
So our policy, our financial reserve policy states that any surplus goes into working funds reserve, and if there's a deficit, it would come from working funds reserve. So I don't have the exact number. I might have it on my phone. Sorry, there was one year that we put it into fleet reserve, but I think that was 2021. Let me get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Any other questions at the moment on that? I guess I could ask the question here, but it might be more suitable for later, so maybe keep it on your mind. But the capital asset management plan is critical, we know this, and we're planning for the replacement of all town-owned assets. I guess the question is, we're planning on the replacement of everything, but do we really, like if I had that for my house, I would have a fund ready to go should the shingles go, should the furnace go, should this go, so you don't have to put on your credit card what happens. It makes so much sense. But I wonder, are there some assets that we simply know that we will never replace, or they're not likely to be replaced? And within the study, is that registered, or is it, no, everything is on the same level, and we have to put reserves to fund the replacement of every asset, including roads, Summit Center, theater, town hall?
I hope I can explain this. It's not black and white. So for buildings, in general, we wouldn't look at replacing, say, and I might get in trouble for saying this, but we wouldn't look at replacing the walls or the actual I don't know what you call it, the bones of the building, right? But we may need a new roof on it. And those are the things that we're including in those capital plans to look at. But there may be a building where you do need to replace it. If you have like a shed, if you have Medill's one, that's actually not in our plan, but yeah, but there's, in general, we don't just say this building needs to be replaced in 20 years and then we need to put $50 million aside for it. It's more the components of it. And that, when we do that facility assessment, it will help break those down and also look at when things do need to be replaced, and then we can look at some economies of scale maybe when we're doing those projects too.
Yeah, that's a great answer, because that's actually explains exactly what I was hoping to understand. That you're taking into account the things that really will one day need to be replaced. And we still have a gap. Yeah, okay.
And that's why we use the term replacement or rehabilitation, because it's not necessarily always a replacement.
Right.
Like you don't necessarily always replace the base of a road. You might just rehabilitate it.
Okay, Mayor Alcock?
Thank you, Chair Morrison. And maybe this is the time, I think, if we're going over the capital plan. So a question, I think I posed this earlier, and I just need to be reminded what that looks like. So earlier, Julia, you made reference to our current capital plan replacement timeline is 20 years. And for all of the sensible reasons to do that. So if there was a suggestion to push it out to a 25-year timeline, what would be the consequences of that, and what would be the monetary gain in that? Would there be, I think there is, and I'm not sure what that looks like.
Good answer. So I think if you looked at the short-term savings, it would be about $79,000 if we did extend it over the period. I don't know what the long-term impact of that would be, because the longer you wait to rehabilitate or replace things, the more costly they get. So that is one item that I don't have a dollar amount on the long-term impact of that.
I appreciate that answer very much. If we were to consider that around the table, maybe this might be the year to do it, given we're doing a new asset management plan this coming year, or updating it. That's the word I wanted. So I'm putting that out there.
Great, thank you. Any other questions at the moment?
Thank you, Chair Morrison. Just because you brought it up, Julia, we were talking about the $50,000 towards the Medill building. That may be something that we push down the road or we don't do this year. And I think it has been flagged for something potentially. And I know it's like a slippery slope. If you don't do it now, it's going to cost us more in the future. But given, this incredible increase in taxes that we have to look at ways of bringing it down. So that may be a possibility. And maybe we'll discuss that later on. So more of a comment than a question.
If I may follow up on that too, I wasn't sure if we were getting into that now, but because that comment was made, I know that I would certainly support the discussion around that, only because it doesn't change the fact that we recognize the importance of looking at doing something with Medill, the replacement, and because we're looking at this tax increase this year, that 50,000 is a good idea, but it's a drop in the bucket as to what the overall project would cost. And so we would be looking at other financing tools, whether it's a debenture or something. And so I would support the discussion around that, Councillor Renwick, for sure.
Sounds good. Any other questions at the moment? We'll continue on. I think you're almost through your list.
Sorry, if I can just answer really quickly. So we did have, at the end of 22, that was the year that we did have, our surplus was around, it was $600,000. And we had put a portion of that into the fleet reserve. And that was an anomaly that we did have council approval to do that because it was so underfunded. In 2021, our year-end surplus was around 1.6.
Okay, so the next area we're going to look at is we put together some comparators. We looked at the same municipal comparators that have been used in other studies to look at how Huntsville compares to them. This data is collected from the Ontario Financial Information Return through the MMAH, which is the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And it's the data is from the most recently published data, which is 2022. So the first one we have here is our taxation per capita. So this looks at the taxation if it was spread out through the entire population in Huntsville, so per person. So you can see here that Huntsville is kind of right in the middle. The lowest being $558 per person, and the highest being at the town of Collingwood as $1,560 per person. So Huntsville's kind of in the middle there at $868.
May I ask a question? Thank you, Chair Morrison. When you're looking at the town of Collingwood and it's 1,560, do they not also have district services in there as well? Like they're not just a municipality, or did you factor out, like we're a two-tier municipality? I don't believe they are. I think they have district, or their district is also in their community. So is that, am I right?
I'd have to check, but I do believe that Collingwood is part of Springwater Township. Or County of Simcoe. So we did use the same comparators that are used for the council remuneration and the staff remuneration. So we've consistently been using these. I do believe they're all lower tiers around similar sizes.
Right. If I may, Chair Morrison, I believe Collingwood is 24,000 people, and their budget is over $38 million. So that's why I was wondering, when I looked at those numbers too, I thought, why would that number be the bottom line, the budget line of $38 million? Why is it so high? But I thought maybe because they have, their district is included in there. Like we don't have district in our budget line, so.
So those numbers would make sense because, and that would bring us to about $1,500 based on your calculation there, because what we did is we took the total lower tier taxes divided by the population. So that does bring us out to that. Yep.
So I guess to your question though, Councilor Ramwick, is if they're not part of a district, then they're doing all their roads, all their bridges, all their everything. But I think CEO Corey might clarify if they're part of a district or not.
So I can, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can confirm that Collingwood is a town in Simcoe County.
And I will just give a disclaimer for all of these because not one municipality is the same. And so it's very difficult. So what we did is we took data that we know, and that's the FIR, and just use that. So we'll tell you like how we're coming up with that, just so that you're clear. But there are going to be nuances for each of these. It's just to give you a high level look at where Huntsville falls.
So, good? Okay, sorry. So the next one we have here is a comparison of the residential tax rate. So similar to the chart before, Huntsville is towards the middle-ish, lower end of that, of the comparators here. So the lower end ranges from 0.26, and the higher end is 0.86, with Huntsville at 0.4.
If I may just say, thank you for the visual. Yes. Always happy to see visual.
So the next one we have here is tax as a percentage of the median income in the town shown. So Huntsville is towards the lower end of the comparators shown here at 1.4%.
So I thought this chart was really interesting. It shows that the compared to the others, Huntsville has the largest land area. And although this can create opportunities in the future for development, as there is more land available, it does create challenges when it comes to road maintenance, and in particular road snow plowing, as there's a large area where the road network is spread across. It's also a challenge when it comes to providing transit to residents.
The next one we have here, it kind of builds on the last slide. So it's population density. So this is the population, people per square kilometer. This next one shows dollars spent per kilometer of road in 2022. So this takes the total expense for transportation services reported in the financial information return for each municipality and divides it by the town or township's kilometer of roads in their network. So you can see that the town of Huntsville is towards the lower end, middle-ish. And the next one is the tax per $300,000 of assessment. So it's that same $300,000 impact value we've been using throughout. Again, the town of Huntsville is comparable to others shown here towards the lower end of the range, and the amounts for 2024 will be shown in a moment.
Okay, so we're almost getting to the end. Everyone's being very patient. So just as noted before, so what does this proposed budget mean? The increase in the tax levy proposed here does not mean that you will have an overall 15% tax rate increase on your tax bill. Huntsville represents a portion of taxes collected through the tax bill, the others being the important services such as the District of Muskoka for water, wastewater, sewer, and waste. And you also pay for education taxes through your tax bill. And these funds are distributed to the various school boards such as Trillium Lakeland School Board. Oh, sorry, I went one too far. So when you do factor in district and education, the overall increase on your tax bill would be an increase of about 8.55, not the full 15.25, which is the Huntsville portion only. This is because the Huntsville portion of your tax bill only accounts for a portion of what you pay overall for your taxes. This chart represents the amount of Huntsville taxes that are paid in each of the towns in Muskoka based on a $300,000 assessment. It's important to note that the increase for Gravenhurst is drafted at a 2.3%, and the draft budget for Bracebridge will be released later in December. So the amount that's shown at the bottom there is actually the 2023 taxes that you would have paid on $300,000 of assessment. So the first top two are for 2024, and already you'll see Bracebridge is higher at their 2023 levels. Oh, we just learned how to do this, so this is very exciting. So this is a very important moment for us when we can figure out we can dig into here. So. And again, this is no reflection on Gravenhurst and Bracebridge. As you can see in the previous slides, you'll see that they're comparably low as well to other municipalities that are comparative. But you'll see even with this proposed increase in this draft budget that the tax bill for someone living in Huntsville would still be less than taxpayers for both Gravenhurst and Bracebridge. So we'll just leave you with a couple of last comments. So budget decisions in the short term can have a big impact on the future. And the budget presented continues to recognize the importance of looking at both short-term and long-term. The budget is based on council-approved policies and directives. Huntsville has kept a low tax rate over the past several years, and on average has increased 2.84 per year over the past 10 years. The increase proposed in this budget meets the needs of the operations for today. This budget will set the town up for success as we continue to grow and to ensure that we are remaining competitive for attracting residents and businesses to our town, ensuring that we are meeting the needs of our residents. So next steps, as we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this is a starting point for discussions on the 2024 budget. Options that the committee can look at are noted here. So the budget could be approved today and forwarded to council for approval. Recommendations could be made today and then forwarded to committee for approval. Or the motion can be deferred to the next meeting and then further discussion can take place. So thank you for your time and attention and your questions so far. And if there are any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Okay, thank you so much, Suzanne and Julia, for all of your work on this and answering all of our questions that have come by email, text, phone call, and in this format. I'm going to open it up. Time to have a bit of a robust discussion on the numbers, and I'll ask who's first. Mayor Alcock, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Morrison, and thank you both, Suzanne and Julia. It was an incredible job, and it's really interesting going through. There's no question that things that you pop out, like we've had 11% increase in our population, and just statistics like that. The last few charts were really, really fantastic for trying to get a sense where do we sit. And so that was very effective. And I completely understand the whole issue of, for the most part, people I meet in the community love their services, and throughout the year we hear from people throughout all the time about what we should be doing for them, right? And with them. So I think you've all made a great argument to say we really value what we serve, and we want not only to maintain, but to continue to not do a better job, because that implies we're not, but just consistently meet that center of excellence that we're used to. And this year, for all of the reasons that you outlined, is kind of an anomaly because of the big factors of cost escalation and the lack of COVID money that we were relying on for a number of years, and all of the other reasons. And I also understand that you can't come forward with suggested changes that you've already included in the draft that are not within your authority to do. They're within our authority. And certainly, I think in a previous discussion, I asked, why are we doing that? And the answer was, well, because you approved a policy change that make us do that. And I thought, okay, well, then I need to pay more attention to some things. But so if I may, there are some things I would, at this time, start. I don't necessarily want to look for, as some people have suggested, cutbacks. I think you've made an incredible case as to why our services are imperative and really important for everybody in our community. But I do think ways of looking for allocating funds towards the budget, towards what we would put on the levy, is something that we can do, or at least discuss. So right off the bat, the $70,000 that we have on the levy for the road needs study, in the past, we've taken that money from our capital reserve because it's for a capital project, and that was our policy change, that we don't do that anymore. And I think for this year, I don't have a problem putting that back and taking it out of the capital reserve, because certainly it's done elsewhere. We used to do it, and this year for me, that would be a suggestion. We also are proposing, last year we took, paid for 2 positions from our theater, and I forget exactly, front of house theater, and we put them on our mat. And this year we proposed to take those 2 positions and put them on the levy. And from my perspective, I think, why not put them back on the mat, so it takes it off the levy, And it's not, these aren't one-time dollars we're talking about next year. This is our MAT tax money. So it doesn't adjust in my mind until one of you tells me I'm wrong, but it doesn't change the service level. It's just changing how we allocate. So that's another, from my perspective, I think an area where I would love a discussion. The Medill contribution, I know I was one that was very excited when you brought that forward as a suggestion. And I said, even symbolically, it's a great idea. But really, in retrospect, given where we're at with a 15-point whatever, is this the year to do it? Because, as I said earlier, the project is going to be a lot of money, and we'll have to figure out how we're going to fund that. If we remove this $50,000 this year, it doesn't mean, certainly in my part, it's still a priority we need to look at as a significant spend, in sometime in the future. If it's okay if I go through some other possibilities. So I did ask the question about pushing it out. I would love to hear what council thinks from the 20-year plan to the 25-year plan. I'm sure there are some risks, but I don't know if they're significant enough that, and because we are embarking on our asset management plan in 2024, then we're going to be reassessing a number of things. So I thought if it is an additional 80,000 savings in doing that, then I would love to hear if council agrees or if that's something we could consider this year. I also asked about the debenture contribution because at a previous council meeting, rightly so, you wanted to ask that every year we increase the amount that we contribute to our capital reserve. Makes all the sense in the world. So this year, the baseline contribution is $600,000 approximately, and you wanted to add over $200,000, which we cut back and said, all right, we'll agree to an additional $138,000 this year. And I would suggest that additional $138,000, this isn't the year. We're still increasing our contribution to the capital. And so, again, I'm putting this out on the council table to say that will be another $138,000 savings from our levy this year. Again, it's the similar question around the $88,000 debenture payment. Last year it came off our levy, and this year we're transferring it to our capital reserve. Fantastic. But we're not saying, and I'm not doing, I think people know where I'm going with this, because if I try and explain it, I'll confuse everybody. But if we decrease by $88,000 the contribution that we're taking from the levy, I think that's what I'm saying. So in a way, it's an additional $88,000 savings. And Julie, if you look at me and look like I don't understand what you're saying, well, then you have to ask me and I'll try and explain it again. But so those are some, and then I haven't even touched. So I'll put this one out on the table because I'm sure it's going through a number of heads. We had the discussion last year, and that was, do we touch the contribution that we make to our Centre Street Reserve? Last year, we chose not to do that. Again, if we decide as a council to touch that, and instead of taking the lease payment and putting it into that reserve and using it to take down our tax rate this year, is that something that we should consider? And again, I don't think, all of these suggestions, I'm not changing what is being proposed for service level and projects and all of that. These are just ways of allocating, and it's not using one-time funding, which kind of got us into this bind in the first place. So that's what I've got, and those are some of the thoughts that I would certainly put on the table.
Perfect. A lot of great thoughts and a lot of good discussion coming. I'm going to go over to Councillor Clark to follow up.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. So I've got some comments and suggestions, just like Mayor Alcock did. So I don't think there's anybody here today that doesn't feel like that the number we're looking at is unacceptable. It is. And I would never consider approving a budget with that kind of an increase. And I understand there's reasons why the finance team brought the budget the way that it was, but I'm disappointed to see the draft come to council so much higher than the budget guidelines that were given by council to staff. So I'll have a difficult time supporting anything that isn't just above the top end of the guideline that we had given in the last year. I would add too, I consistently voted no on many items this past year that I knew would negatively affect the budget. And some of the decisions that council made, good or bad, are coming back to bite us now in this budget. And I'd also mention, in hindsight, we heard in the report that the tax rates, the average tax rate over the last several years was around 2.8%. And I'd say in hindsight that the tax rates were likely kept far too low during that period of time, and has also came back to bite us. So some of the suggestions that I would put out on the table today is absolutely I would support applying all of the 2024 infra pipe lease revenue money to offset the levy. I've said this many times here in the past. This is over $400,000 a year, and I believe we should be looking to do it not only for 2024, but for the foreseeable future to offset the budget. There's no point using the funds for just 1 year because we have to account for the money the next year, and then we'll be in the same situation we are now. So we need to commit to using the money going forward. The money being allocated from the levy towards the capital budget needs to be a much more reasonable number. I agree with that as well. Through extending the timeline that the ladies were mentioning. I look at that a lot like an amortization on a mortgage. So when you can't afford your mortgage payments, one of the options is to extend the amortization on your mortgage, and that's basically what we're kind of proposing here today to do. If it's 25 or 30, I don't know what that amortization might look like on the capital proposal, but absolutely that's something we need to look at. I would support that. You know, I get we've got a plan for our infrastructure, and I know that the capital asset management plan is in deficit, but you know, we've got a plan for the future, but we also need to survive today. And I think that's an important point that council needs to understand. I'll also put out on the table that I would also say that the positions that have been asked for by operations needs to be reevaluated. We've talked about it here before, but I personally think when we're looking at this budget that we are right now, we should be looking at one position, and I would suggest one parks attendant. And finally, as far as the community requests that are listed on appendix, I think it's F, you mentioned, based on this budget, I'm not in favor of any of those items on that list. It's just not the right time to do that right now. There's quite a list there. I know they're public requests, some are council requests, but it's just based on this budget, it's just not the right time for that right now. Maybe can be looked at in next year's budget, but not right now. As far as Medill, I would support removing the Medill funding from the budget. I don't think that makes sense right now either, and it's not, $50,000 isn't going to make or break that situation there. Also, I agree with Mayor Alcock's statement about the roads needs study. Makes more sense to me that that's a capital expense than a levy expense. Those are some of my thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to, at any point, Suzanne or Julie, if you want to step in and comment on any of these comments, just feel free. You know, for now, I'll just keep going on. Deputy Mayor Armour?
Thanks, Chair Morrison. I'm just wondering what the process here is right now, because I think we're probably going to hear a lot of the same things come around this table. And I'm not sure if we're just going to do a repeat. Is someone keeping track of them? Or are we putting it all into a motion? Or, because I feel there's probably the same thought around the table, except for maybe a few odds and ends, but I just want to make sure we got a process going forward here and what we're doing.
Yeah, Julia, will comment on that?
Sorry, I should have explained what I was doing. So I do have a list and I have the amount, so I'm keeping track of what I'm hearing from the group. Just two points. But for the $70,000 for the roads needs study, there's no problem to take it from reserves, but I would recommend we actually take it from working fund reserves so that it's not impacting our policy. The other one is just a suggestion that could be done is if we're looking at having ongoing funding for the MAT to help offset the levy, we could just have an amount in the, like, rather than tying it to a position, which is a little bit awkward, just to have a set amount. So right now we're looking at about 108 or 172,000. So if we wanted to say we want to put in 180,000 overall, or whatever the number is, I think it would just be a little bit simpler than trying to match it to a particular position each year. But I am keeping track, so when we get to the end, and we'll make sure we have everything.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Armour?
Thanks very much. Just on the last point, so you're saying instead of funding the positions out of the MAT tax, that we just automatically put the money into the operating budget and continue with those positions on the levy? Is that what you're saying? Okay, just want to get my head around that. All right, thanks.
Well, I think you're saying not funded from the levy, funded from MAT, but consistently. Set a number that it comes from MAT, right?
So I would just recommend not tying the two together. So the actual overall increase or the overall impact would be you would use $200,000 of MAT funding each year, just, or whatever the number is, but just not tying it to those specific positions.
Yeah, and I think on that note, Director Maxwell, Councillor Stone, Lauren, myself, and Denise and Julia, we've had meetings about the allocation of MAT funds. And I think that could be a suggestion that comes from council, but goes to that little group as we allocate, because we have other thoughts on that funding too. And I'll elaborate, but even then, another option is we could decide that this year we're allocating $180,000. And I think this is the same thing for the infra pipe, but that each subsequent year we pull back a tiny bit. Because if next year we all of a sudden fund the two positions from the levy, it's $170,000. If we pull 20,000 back, 30,000 back each year until we can fund it from the levy without one big impact, I think that'll be easier to stomach. And it could be the same thing with the pipe money, that this year $440,000 goes right towards the levy. I think but at the same time, we need to respect the fact that a lot of discussion went around this table of having that fund. So I think what we can do is 2024, $440,000 goes towards the levy. 2025, $390,000 goes towards the levy. 2026, $340,000. So $50,000 less each year, so that we're not funding $440,000 this year, and next year we got to find that money all at once. So it's just a way to gradually work it back in. So.
Thank you for that, and I agree. I think that makes sense, certainly on the Center Street Fund. If you go back at the original intent, we all know what it was, and I think when it was first set up, there was it would be capped at $4 million once we had $4 million in there, and then we would reassess. So the intent isn't gone, and so I think it's important to recognize. And plus, I think there's going to be a study with respect to that minor with that site this year. So that might inform future decisions going forward. So I do support that, but I absolutely support Councillor Clark's position that we use all of the funding from that this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to go to, unless you want to hop in first, CEO Corey? Oh, yeah, so CEO Corey will go, then Councillor Schumacher and Councillor Stone.
Thanks very much, Chair Morrison. So just to that point, the staff will be working on a monitoring plan, which will just do testing to ensure there's not leaching on the site. The other option that has been presented to previous councils is we actually develop a mitigation plan. And that mitigation plan will tell us what is there and what is required to clean it up if we ever needed to do it. So I would suggest that that's something that should be considered moving forward, because then we know what we're saving for. But right now, we don't know what we're saving for. We don't know what the costs would be if we had to ever deal with cleaning up any seepage. So at this point in time, it's monitoring, but I think there's an opportunity to spend a bit of money to determine what it would actually cost and what we need to have in the bank account if something happened.
Makes sense? Councillor Schumacher?
Thank you. Through your Chair Morrison. So, yeah, to the CAO, what is that 60,000? Is that part of that you had set aside?
The 60,000, yes, that's to do the monitoring plan. That was in my consulting budget for this year that we're transferring over to next year. So it will be completed by Operations Division.
Okay. Yeah, so I would be in favor of this year, and then let's see what that report kind of comes back with, and I think then we can look at the Center Street from that.
Councillor Stone and then Councillor Renwick.
Thank you. Just two comments. So about the MAT tax, a one-time 180,000 this year, I have no trouble with, but we had a small working group, and we need to have full discussions about what that money is actually needed to do. And we have many things that we want to do with it. So a one-time this year only for the 180,000, that's cool. We've got the money sitting there anyway. I just want to go back to Councillor Clark's point about operations or parks staff. I agree that, you know, we need the manager of parks to be replaced and just one other, not everything that was asked for. One other attendant.
Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Morrison, and Chair Stone took the question out of my mouth, but I do have a follow-up to that. Is the, at this point, those positions are not in the budget, are they, Julia? The lead hand and the three? They are in the budget.
Just want to mention that there are the 3 full-time positions and plus the lead hand position included in this draft budget, as well as a big reduction in part-time hours. So if we do get rid of some of those positions, we need to add back some of those part-time hours.
Right. Thank you.
And I don't know if any of the other, if you want to get any other comments, because I know that has a ripple effect on some of the other departments as well.
I was going to say, would this be out of turn for me to ask Colleen to come down and speak to this a bit? Would that be okay? Okay, because I know Colleen would know exactly what we can get away with, what's needed, and whatnot. That's okay. So, Colleen, I guess the question is, of those 4 positions, if we were to do just 1 or 2, like, we're trying to save where we can. What are your thoughts on what is absolutely needed just to do current service levels, and what can we get away with?
Through you, Chair. So to be very honest, the current service level we provide, we feel that we need all 4 of those positions to move forward and deliver the services. Year over year, some people call it service creep, but there's more demanded of our staff, summertime and wintertime. And to speak to specifically the lead hand position, we are a 7-day-a-week operation. And we have 1 lead hand in place right now who is on the verge of burnout because we do expect a lot of her. And we're very lucky to have dedicated, hardworking staff. But we can only take so much from them, even though they're so super. But and on top of that, Keith reminded me in our HR department that we were previously running a 2 lead hand operation, but we pared that down and made our current lead hand of Parks and Horticulture. In hindsight, we may have put too much in that 1 position. So that would be going back to having the 2 lead hands so that 7 days a week we have adequate supervision and direction, as well as the ongoing demands from events, et cetera. And believe me when I tell you, we don't like to say no when any other departments, community services or others ask us for help. It really hurts us, but we've had to in the past year or 2. And I really feel like without adding 3 full-time staff as well as a lead hand, we're going to have to do that more because they seem like little increments all the time, but they add up into we're just not keeping up to what we think is the acceptable level of, let's say, the weeds being cleaned up off of Main Street, all those things that we could do much better if we had adequate staffing. And to me, adding those 4 bodies are barely keeping us up to what we need now, not even talking about future.
Councillor Schumacher.
Thank you, through you, Chair Morrison. sort of to Colleen, but also to Director Babineau, because again, it is that ripple effect, as you said, with community services. The impact of having these 4 positions in parks, what does that do for community services? More maybe for Simone, but you two can tag team it.
Happy to, thank you, through you, Chair Morrison. Yeah, I put my full support behind these 4 positions. Specifically, like Colleen said, the lead hand assists us in operating 7 days a week, extended hours, much like the Canada Summit Center. We have lead hands available to lead, direct, and react. They have operational issues, they have maintenance and care and control schedules that they have to meet, but they also have to react to customers. They also have to react to emergencies or shortfalls or whatever else might happen. So when we're running these 7-day operations that are not just 9 to 5, we need someone who is leading the crew and being able to react. At the Canada Summit Center, the facilities team is a sales and service operation. We kind of extend that and expect that of our parks team, but that's not their direction. Their focus is to maintain and care for the facilities and move on to the next one as per the schedule, as how fast the grass grows and all those good things, not my expertise. But our customers, we're sending them out there with permits, and there's needs to be somebody to put toilet paper back in the bathrooms when they run out. There's 700 people in the park at any given time. You know, these things we're calling on the parks team to be able to facilitate.
CEO Corey and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. So another thing is the feedback that we get from the user group. So for example, if it's a baseball game, if it's a soccer game, if it's something going on, I can tell you I get regular phone calls about that, about not having enough staff on site, about not being able to get a hold of anyone. It's pretty difficult when you have potentially one person working on a weekend trying to cover all of the parks and empty the garbage. And so again, to maintain a level of service which we feel the community expects, our current staff complement is not sufficient.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. I totally appreciate the comments that we've heard today from Colleen and Director Babineau. But the reality is, unfortunately, we just can't do it all in this year. We can't. And I think that absolutely the parks position should be reevaluated in 2025. And if we need more, we need to phase those hires in the next budget years. We can't do it. I'm certainly not prepared to do it in this budget year, all of them. And believe me, I get calls about all those things you've mentioned as well, so I totally understand that. But I still would only support one parks hire. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Mayor Alcock.
As is often the case, I support Councillor Clark. Maybe not to the one position, but I do support the phasing in. And part of the reason is we will be hiring soon, I think, at some point, a new parks manager. And at some point, we'll have a change of position with the director of operations. And so it's sort of, there's a new, I think both positions, they'll want to come in and assess what we've got and say, oh my God, we're in free fall, and this is what we need to do. So, but I agree with Councillor Clark that it is, you know, the addition of 4 positions at this point. And I do respect the way it was done, though, as far as financing, that we're collapsing 2 part-time positions, and that's making up one of the full-time. I forget the configuration, but so I certainly would support going forward with two of the 4 this year, and looking at it as a phased in with the assessment of the new positions, right? The manager and the director.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks very much, Chair. It's almost like we're in a betting game here, 1 here, 1 there, 2 there. But anyhow, Julie, just quick question to you. Can you refresh my memory on the cost here, because I think, wasn't it 200 some odd $1,000 in part-time money being converted? That's what the overall cost was for 4, and what the overall cost would be for 1 or 2, and how that really affects it. Are we talking 10,000 or are we talking $100,000? And while you're looking at that, I'll ask Colleen a quick question. Do we have the equipment for these staff to be able to use, like for doing sidewalks, cemetery, whatever they're going to be doing? Do we have enough equipment, or later on is it going to cost us more than that?
Through you, Councillor Morrison. So some of the things that are related to growth, like for example, extended sidewalks in some areas of town, eventually they will require more equipment, sidewalk machines, that type of thing. But for the most part, again, because we're spread out over 7 days, we wouldn't have the full complement in on very many days at all. So on those days, we spread out and do what we can with the equipment we have, and it works very efficiently because it is a very short time frame where we actually have more the bulk of the bodies in. And if I can note to, and perhaps ask Lisa Smith to comment, we have been working just to justify sort of, how we came up with the numbers of bodies we did request. We've been working with our Human Resources Department for over a year to calibrate all the tasks and how frequently they happen and how many different locations we visit and service on a daily and weekly basis. And it was through all of that that we determined this was what we needed in order to sort of come up to an appropriate staffing level. And so I appreciate the fact that having a new manager in place shortly, as well as a new director, I totally understand what you're saying related to that, but we've identified that we're so far behind in bodies and hours to do all the work that we need the boots on the ground, the people out there doing the work. And, we have confidence in the hiring that we'll do so that they'll be able to adapt to whatever direction they get from a new manager, a new person in the director's chair that would have the right skill set to accomplish what we're set out to do.
Thank you, Colleen, and I think you have a follow-up?
Just a quick follow-up. Now that you mentioned Lisa, I think I should go down her way. What's the recruitment process look like? Like, if we were to pass this budget in January, February, whatever, how long would it be before you actually get boots on the ground? How would that affect the levy, really, if we're only going to have the staff for half a year or a few months? And is there 4 people out there looking for a job?
Thank you, through you, Chair Morrison. So the recruitment process usually is about 2 months in total, if that's what you're asking, by the time we have an advertisement out and we get candidates. Certainly within the parks area, we've had good response when we've put out advertisements for that field of work. So, certainly we would, have incumbents by the time that, Colleen and Tina would require them. So that part certainly wouldn't be, a struggle, right? And interestingly enough, too, I just wanted to add to what Colleen had said. We have had very in-depth conversations, because I think once you actually see the inventory of what the Parks Department actually maintains, it's incredible. With the amount of beaches and parks and, sports fields, and not only that, it's the other requests too, benches here. There's a whole bunch of things that actually Tina put together a really good spreadsheet of the increase in items from one year over the other, which I actually have up here. But we also have a lot of other lists of things that the parks do. But you need to also understand that if there's new subdivisions or any other things, they usually have a little parkette or a garden that they have to look after, and all of these things add up over the years. And this is where Colleen is saying, there aren't enough employees right now for what we have existing. And I can't stress enough, too, about our mental wellness of our employees. if you ever have a moment to take a look at our actual inventory of parks, not even just parks, beaches, sports fields, everything else that they're doing, gardens, it's a big portfolio. I do support certainly those positions.
Thank you, Lisa. And that also includes the locks as well, right? Which is a significant part of parks. Go to CEO Corey and then Councillor Fitzgerald.
So, Mr. Chairman, I just was going to suggest this definitely is an area of interest for committee, so thinking that staff could definitely prepare more information, bring back, no, we're not, okay, I will, I'm just looking, there's a lot of information I don't think we can provide at this time, so I would prefer that we wait until the next meeting to provide any information.
Can I just answer Dan's question?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So right now, what we're looking at is an increase of the 3 staff, which is a cost of $252,000, and reducing that by $98,000. So that brings us to the $152,000 net increase. If we look at just having one staff member and keeping in the part-time staff, we'd be looking at a cost of $182,000.
Okay, I know you mentioned 3 staff. Isn't it 4, a lead hand plus 3?
Sorry, I didn't contemplate the lead hand in the calculation just because it's not comparing apples to apples there.
Yeah, because I think Councillor Clark's thought was a parks attendant and no lead hand. So I guess, and to CEO Corey's comment, it might be best to bring every scenario back to the next meeting. Because what happens if we just do a lead hand, no parks attendants, 2 parks attendants, no lead hand? There's a lot of different scenarios because we're looking to lessen the impact on the taxpayer, but I think there's no one at this table that doesn't want to support parks. And parks, when you look at what people say, what do I get for my tax dollars? It's parks, facilities, roads, potholes. That's what they want. So we got to be careful where we cut. But I think back to throughout the year, and Councillor Clark, you alluded to this, I know there's a plan coming on human resources. I would love parks to get all 4 of those employees at some point. And we owe it to them to give them something now. But when a request would come throughout the year to this table, we need somebody in planning, we need somebody in clerks, we need someone here, and always warranted, like those positions were needed. We didn't anticipate that at this budget cycle, we'd also be asked for another 4 positions in this department. We weren't aware that that need was coming. So we may have decided differently around those positions had we known the big picture. So I think for this coming year, if there's ever a request coming for a position, we need to know what other positions are anticipated and what do you think each department will be asking for human resources at the budget process. Because that's, now we know each position we added is coming, that's a big part of our levy increase this year, right? So just something I want to make people aware of that I've kind of seen happen. I'm going to, Councillor Fitzgerald, and then.
Thanks, Chair Morrison. Great presentation. Appreciate all the comments so far. This is my 9th opportunity to go through a draft budget. And our responsibility is to the public, short-term and long-term. And I think we always think short-term and we have to have a palatable number about when we're looking at the draft approval. And I agree the increase is high, but I have to look at our comparators and how long have we been making that number palatable and not doing our long-term planning responsibly enough as what we're supposed to do, not just short-term, long-term. That's first comment. Second comment is our human capital is the people who work for this corporation are the most important thing we have. If they tell us they need 4 people in parks, I believe they need 4 people in parks. We don't have the ability to leave garbage cans out in our parks when people come up here anytime after usually Thanksgiving, sometimes 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Where does the garbage go? We don't have the resources to leave those things out that long. So our parks are dirty, they're littered, that kind of thing. Grass isn't cut. Preparation for winter stuff is taking precedence over that because we don't have enough manpower. So I think for us to sit here and tell Colleen that, well, we only want to give you 3 people, how is that doing our human capital justice, our most important thing in this corporation? People are still overworked. Lisa talks about mental health. It's a real thing. So that's somewhere I don't think that we can save. you know, at what cost are we saving money? So we look at 230,000 on the impact of a levy is $15 a year based on a 300,000 assessment. At what point do we stop stealing from our reserves to make it palatable for this one budget? I think we don't think far enough ahead, and our comparators prove it to us. We're way behind in our levy with our comparators. So I know it's a high number, and I think that everyone's suggestions, most of them, are good suggestions, and we can find some savings. I worry about taking from reserves. You know, we had $440,000 a year lease. Well, that's a corporation that could shut down tomorrow and pay us the remaining years out on their lease without a bat of an eye. Then we have a property that we have to remediate, and as we all know what happens around here, costs go up. Look at Fairburn. Double the cost for groundwork. Is that going to happen in remediation there? Are we respecting our waterfront strategy when we make that suggestion to pull the money from those reserves? I don't think we are. So it's a fine balance between long-term and short-term. I know it's a big number. We have to look at the final cost of what our decisions are adding up to. So I would like you all to think a little more long-term and be very cautious with our reserves because they're way underfunded currently.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Over to Councillor Cloutier.
Through you, Chair. I agree a lot with Councillor Fitzpatrick. But I think if Lisa brings forth the information that Tina has compiled, and we see that, and I think we can get a better view of exactly what we need in those positions. I mean, we can all sit back here and say, you know, oh, I don't think we need it, I don't think we need it, or we do, or we don't. But I mean, if we don't have the information, and I think that sounds like the information is there for the need and the want for it, you know, again, you look at stuff, when you see it, you're going to believe it. But, and also, I like the long-term plan. I'm not big on, you know, okay, let's come out of this, you know, with everybody patting us on the back. It's time maybe that we did take the kick and we do it now and we get used to it. I moved to this community 23 years ago. I lived outside Ottawa, and the taxes are basically same facilities and that I'm getting here and services. My taxes now, as of last year, are the same amount as what I was paying 23 years ago outside Ottawa in a farming community. So taxes in this community, I personally think are not bad. Yes, you're going to pay high in the waterfront, but your property's worth $5 or $6 million. But I think the services that we get for what we pay for are pretty good, and I think we have to continue to keep that level of service up.
Very good. I'm going to go to Councillor Clark and then Councillor Schumacher.
Thanks, Chair Morrison. This will probably be the last thing I say today, maybe. I would say 15% is not a palatable number. And hard decisions have to be made, and to not make any decision it's just not a decision at all. So try telling that to the taxpayer who's barely getting by, has seen their hydro bills go up, food costs go up, their mortgage payments have doubled because they've had to renew their mortgage, on and on it goes. Literally everything's more expensive, just like it is for us here. But we can't continue to pile the pain onto the taxpayer. And you know, I'd be happy to allow any councillor that wants to answer my calls to provide an answer why we couldn't get this tax rate much lower than it is. And that approach, in my opinion, just highlights an out-of-touch approach with our taxpayers' reality.
Okay, Councillor Schumacher.
Thank you, and probably my last comment because I do have a 2 o'clock and I have to leave. So to Colleen, when we look at that one slide when they did the comparators and we have 705 square kilometers of land area that we're looking at for the town of Huntsville, I know as Chair of Community Services, it takes one staff up and an entire day just to go from Aspenden Hall to Stevenson Hall to Port Sydney Hall to get their work done. And I'm thinking something like Ilfracombe to Port Sydney, and that's just covering my half of the territory. I guess when we're looking at that report coming back, I'd like to see some of that, because the travel distance, I think that even to go from one area that we have throughout takes a lot out of your staff. Is that correct?
Absolutely. All of the tasks add up in time, obviously. We attempt to do them in the most efficient way possible, but definitely travel time is one of them. But then just, all the things we encounter at each site. You might think you're going to be at a park for 15 minutes to pick up litter and empty a garbage can, but if they encounter a different situation than what they're expecting, then there can be a lot of delays. But the number of locations that we visit and the different tasks and the frequency that those tasks happen, it's challenging to hit it all. And believe me, our team want to do a great job, but we're taxed for time for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like you run into the encounter at Creekside Park where the teenagers decided to tackle all 8 picnic tables into a pyramid for fun, right? So yeah, you run into those snags. I totally get it. But I do agree with Councillor Morrison in that we've already heard at the table today where people are looking for 2025 for marketing position, for the mechanic position. So if those things are on the thoughts of staff, and that's going to come throughout the year, I think to Councillor Morrison's point, don't just give us one here and one there throughout the year. Like, let us have an idea of what that impact is going to be, because if we do one here and there, and then all of a sudden the next budget comes and there's an ask for another 4 position, it kind of puts us into that pickle.
Thank you, Councillor Schumacher. Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. And maybe this will be my last as well. I don't know. So one of the things, I appreciate all of the other comments that I've heard. And one of the comments I heard from staff in previous meetings was really this is the year of the catch-up, right? And I know that Gravenhurst Council, I think from 2010 to 2014 or somewhere in there, that was their years of catch-up. And so for years, they had like a 9%, 10% increase to do what we're trying to do now. And so I truly respect that. And I'm trying to accommodate that in my head. And I think, well, maybe there's a way, to Councillor Clark's point, I am really not comfortable with 15% in 1 year. That doesn't, I just can't get my head around that. Maybe we catch up over 2 years. And maybe you could comment a bit, Julia, about if we did that over 2 years, the pain, then the third year it comes in looking a little bit differently. But I am going to go back to my original comment was the items that I identified, I thought were doable to bring that 15% down, because with the exception of the service level delivery around parks, and I agree that's got to go away and come back. What are the consequences of 2 versus 1 versus lead hand, whatever? And we might be right back to where we started, which is 4. And I agree with everyone who said I respect everything park staff does and recognize what an area they have to deliver on. So that I'm looking forward to further discussion. But with respect to some of the other suggestions, that doesn't affect the budget that's come forward. It doesn't affect level of service. We're respecting that. We're just saying, let's fund it a little differently. And we'll revisit a couple of those suggestions next year. So I'm speaking obviously about the funding from MAT tax, or the road needs study going to working reserve versus levy. So if you add the ones that we've talked about, Julia, and maybe this is where I'm getting to, is where are we at for bringing that number down? I've got a list, and I can remind you of what we have sort of talked about. I don't know if we've had full agreement around the table, but it would be good to get a sense of what the impact of what we've suggested. And so far, what I've got is the 180 mat tax, 70,000 road needs, 50,000 Medill, 88,000 debenture reallocate, if you know what I mean, 138,000, which was the increase on the increase to the capital reserve, potentially 88,000 pushing it out from a 20-year plan to 25-year, as to your point, Councillor Clark, extending the amortization period. And then we get into the issue of the Centre Street Fund. And I'm not sure we're agreed around the table. But if we could look at what that does, that would be really helpful for me.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock. Do you want to respond to any of that, Julia, at all at the moment, or you're good? Your mic's on, that's all. So you're okay. Just want to make sure I'm not missing you. Okay, Councillor Stone.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the comments, especially Councillor Fitzgerald, and you are right. To our comparators, we need to move where we are within that, and sometimes it's painful to get there, and perhaps we don't do it in 1 year, though, especially in a year of high inflation. People are hurting. They're having a hard time buying their groceries, so 15% is absurd. So I hope that staff has listened to the comments, and I look forward to the next meeting if they can bring back all the possibilities that we've talked about, and maybe they have suggestions of their own, which I would love to hear as well. And then we can have a fulsome discussion about where we're at, what's the number look like, and what do the future years look like.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Stone. And in the interest of not going on too long, I'm going to make sure we all get to speak. I'm going to have a couple of comments, and I think we're all in, it seems like we're leaning towards coming back January 11th with more answers. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go Councillor Fitzgerald, Deputy Mayor Armour, and we're not cutting anyone off. Anyone has something to say, please say it, but that's the plan.
Thanks, Chair Morrison, and thanks, Councillor Stone, for those comments. Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we try and solve everything this year, but I just want us to make sure that we're taking into account human capital, mental health of our greatest resource, and maintaining that level of service, because I think we've fallen behind. Well, we should have our garbage cans, and we still have a community that is, the locals are using more, they're inviting friends up, and what are we showing them? Let's show them what Huntsville's all about. And visitors that come on their own as well. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a 2-year, 3-year process to get where we need to be, but I'm looking forward to seeing the numbers come back, and it's something we do every year, and I love the process. It actually is one of those things that I think kind of makes the council gel when it's a relatively new council. So,
thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald. Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair. One other thing I'd like to see us look at is our capital contribution to the roads. Because what is it, 650,000, I think, or 750,000 this year, I think we're moving across there. So I'd like to see us go back, maybe look at what road projects are out there today, what we could not do, and decrease our capital contribution from the levy. Anybody get that?
I would just.
I hate to touch roads at all, but.
I would just caution that at the last council meeting, I believe that council actually added an additional road that wasn't even on our capital list. And we're, we're funding it at about 30% right now. So I think it would have I think going backwards on roads would have a very detrimental effect.
That's just your opinion.
Yeah. I would say, my own opinion of Deputy Mayor Armour's comment is that everything has to be on the table. So when you bring that up for discussion, doesn't mean we're ever, like for anyone listening at home, doesn't mean we're cutting roads, and Brandon is already shaking over there that we might cut a roads budget. In fact, I'd like to find an extra $2 million for roads, but certainly everything is worthy of a discussion at this point.
That's what I was trying to say. I think we need to put it on the table there, if there's an opportunity there.
As part of the overall.
$7.2 million in roads next year that we're spending, so. If there's something that we could maybe take in-house, gravel or brushing or something to save $100,000, $200,000, I think we should probably look at it, or at least get the director to look at it. Thanks.
Yep. I think, Councillor Fitzgerald, did you have one more comment?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Armour, for that. I look at our comparators, and still, one of our biggest complaints is roads. And some of our comparators are twice what we are currently contributing to roads. I can't imagine, because where we fall in our geographical size and our kilometer of roads, how that correlates, but like, for me, that's something I'd like to see increased on a regular basis. We had such great success with our 10-year roads capital plan, and I think we need to try and implement that again, so.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald, and I think Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. And I agree that the discussion around budget is always very exciting, and it's very, it's challenging. And I would have to say, coming from that side of the room, we have sort of slightly two different views, and I would have to lean more towards what Councillor Clark is saying about we cannot put a 15% budget increase out there. But I understand what Councillor Fitzgerald is saying, that, you know, that we have to right the ship, let's say. If the ship is tilting one way, we need to right it. I think, and maybe this is the portion where we say we put a motion forward that we discuss this in January the 11th, and that staff brings back the proposals around the changes, how much that would affect the bottom line, and also the, I would like a more, I guess, a more information about having the lead hand, and we discussed that already, the lead hand versus the 3 full-time staff. And I was just looking at some of the activities that are happening within the town, like specifically around like hockey or soccer or ball. Hockey is actually going, there will not be as many hockey games. From 215,000, we're down to 231 to 215. Soccer is down slightly. Ball is up. So there are, I mean, that's information that staff can bring us back about the Parks Department and whether we know how many people we'd actually need in the park. So I would put a motion forward that this information comes back for January the 11th for a full discussion.
Good, thank you. Go to CEO Corey and then Councillor.
I'm not sure if I am. Thank you, Chair Morrison. So again, staff completely appreciate the position that council's in. It's very difficult. We're all taxpayers as well. We totally understand. But we do feel that we have an obligation to let you know what is required to run the organization. It does cause me a lot of concern to hear about reductions to road works, because when it was presented by operations, we already did some cuts that were presented that our team said to us, we really feel we need this. And at the senior leadership team level, we said, we can't possibly do all that. So before it even got here, we already cut from Public Works. And the other thing that I think is important to note is during our strategic planning process and your strategic plan coming forward, we have a pillar on infrastructure. And the community was very, very vocal when they talked about active transportation and they talked about maintaining roads in the existing network. Our community told us through that strategic planning process they wanted us to focus on it and invest in it. So it is the biggest part of our budget. And I listened to our team many, many times over saying, we are not okay. So we are meeting our minimum maintenance standards at probably to our demise, because we're trying to make sure that we do that. But I would really caution about pulling back in that area, because our community has already said that they want to see us invest in it. So I felt that was important to note, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Councillor Cloutier, and then all you guys over there basically want to talk.
First of all, I don't want to see any road work cut. We do have the Muskoka asphalt coming soon, fill our potholes full of ice and snow. Should be all right for a little while. But other than that, I'd like to keep our money in our roads. That's what any majority of calls everybody gets. I'm just worried about January 11th with the next month, whether, are we pushing our staff here a little bit too much this time of the year to come back with anything like that. I just throwing it out there, and I think, I mean, the 15 is big, and that scares everybody, and I think we can get it down. It's definitely not going to go through at 15, but I think with a little bit of, I don't think everybody should panic right now. Let's just work a little extra harder and see what we can do, but don't get scared at the 15, because I don't think we're going to put that through, but there's ways that we can whittle it down and fund different projects.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Councillor Fitzgerald, Deputy Mayor Armour, and Mayor Alcock.
Thanks, Chair Morrison, and good comments there, Councillor Cloutier. Just in response to Councillor Renwick, I don't think we have two different schools of thoughts. I think we just want everyone to have all the considerations in place moving forward. I don't think 15 or 17% is palatable, but we need to come up with a plan to address our reserves, which we need to do more work on. And I think we need to find more money for roads. And, you know, I look forward to our next discussion, because we will find areas to save.
Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thanks, Chair Morrison. I just want to rebuttal to the CEO there about roads. I agree. I was there at this table when we increased that, and I still agree with the increase in that. But I think, as Councillor Morrison said, we need to put everything on the table so we're transparent with all of our constituents. We know how important the roads are. They're important to me. They're important to everybody that I talk to. But I just think we need to put everything on the table. So just, it's all good.
Mayor Alcock.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. So I understand wanting to go to January 11th, but I think in the meantime, though, we've put it, and I know Julia's been working on trying to revise the proposed tax increase, given the suggestions that have been made around the table. So I don't think I'm being presumptuous to ask Julia if you've actually been working on that, and you might have some changes, what it would look like with the suggested changes today.
So I'll just highlight what I've heard, just so I make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So we've got the capital contribution to Medill of 50,000. Roads funding for the roads needs study to come from working fund reserve for 70,000. The capital contributions for ending debentures I had is 87,000. Taking the full environmental reserve, which is a 444,000. Getting rid of that increased contribution for capital of the 138,650. Taking 180 of MAT funding for operations. And also looking at reducing the capital contribution by 78,000 to bring it to like a 25-year plan, as well as not including the community group requests that was attached to Appendix F. That would bring us to an overall tax increase of 10.98, and overall in your tax bill it would be 6.45.
That's awesome information, Julia. Thank you. And quick as always. Mayor Alcock, follow up.
And Julia, that was fantastic. Thank you. And I don't know if you can do this quickly. What would be right now the Huntsville portion of the tax increase on 300,000 assessment is $198. What does that bring the $198 down to? Presumably a third is removed. Something like that, right? Because if we're going to 10.9, so we've reduced it by 5, right?
Should be somewhere around 150.
So it would go from 196 for the town portion per year on 300,000 to 140.
140. Okay. So that's significantly lower. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stone.
Just a quick question. So on the slide that identifies the District of Muskoka levy that we're working in, you have 3.5%. It's 4.35.
I believe they're using a different growth number. So I think the growth number that we're using is a bit higher. So we did have quite a bit of growth that came in after they would have done their budget.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
And I guess on that point, Julia, when you combine district, education, and town of Huntsville, instead of 8 point whatever, would we be down closer to 5 point something? 6 point something? Oh, 6.45 total, okay. As I already mentioned.
Let me just double check. It would go from 8.55 to 6.45.
Okay. I guess say that it's been a great discussion. It's hard for me to sit back and listen, which is great. So I've listened to everybody and not had a lot to say. I think this is a beautiful discussion. I think what the public needs to know is that the staff have already worked almost on a daily basis to try to make sure they were coming with numbers that are responsible, yet not cutting services. The benefit we have as council is that we know the staff. We see how they work. We know that they're not trying to inflate taxes just to make their jobs easier. They're not adding things in that they don't need. So I do know cutting more is going to be a challenge, and even asking staff to cut more is virtually impossible because what they bring to the table is already with frugality in mind, right? I would say coming into January 11th, if any staff does find some efficiencies or some savings on how we can, for instance, say if we do this, then we can still afford to get these positions in parks. Council as well, if we say, you know what if we do this, then we can still get these positions in parks. Because the bottom line is we don't want to cut any services. We want to add human capital, but quite frankly, we can't afford the 15%. So I think what we did here today is amazing because we come up with ideas on how to do a bit of a tax mitigation strategies, if you will. We're looking at real life solutions that will not have an impact on the taxpayer and will also keep our services where they are. Because Councillor Clark and Councillor Stone's comments, not everyone is doing okay. And even those that were doing okay, now because of mortgage increases and fuel and everything else, like it's really, really tough out there right now if you talk to food banks and whatnot. So every $20 we add is going to have an impact. So when we can save somebody a bit of money, we have to. But keep in mind, this also comes down to even the tenants out there. Like when I owned a rental, if my taxes went up, I had to find a way to pass that on to the tenant so I could still pay my mortgage. So even tenants are being affected. And quite frankly, we were elected by the entirety of our population. So we're here to represent everyone. So these exercises might seem like we're trying to nickel and dime here and there, but every penny counts. I think we need to look at long-term planning. Julie and I have had a discussion. I would love to see the next budget cycle be, we can't do a 2-year budget cycle, but the next budget cycle should have a lot of consideration for the following year. And I think that could come into even 3 years if you think of right now. And to Councillor Fitzgerald's comment, I echo it. We can't shortchange our community just to make the numbers look good, right? We can't do that. So if we recognize on a 3-year plan, we're going to need this, 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 and this, then let's start averaging some stuff out. Let's look at tax mitigation. Let's look at where the revenues are going. Let's look at MAT tax ideas. I mean, instead of just looking at how to save, let's look at how to contribute more to the community while not heavily impacting the taxpayer. I think, and honestly, I feel that's where all of our staff and our council are at. I think we're all there and we're all on the same page. So for the public, whether you believe us or not, we're trying our best to make the tax impact as low as possible while giving you guys the town you deserve. And that's where we're at, right? And we're going to keep doing our best as long as we're here. Any other comments on that at the moment from staff or from anybody here? CAO Corey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on behalf of staff, I do want to say we appreciate the conversation today. This was a very hard budget for us to bring forward. We felt it is our job to let you know what's required. And the changes that were made today were changes that were outside of our scope. We didn't have the ability to automatically implement those into the budget. I know there have been some conversations within the community saying, you know, how could staff possibly present this budget to council? I just need to make it very clear the decisions made today were outside of our authority, and we didn't have the ability to implement those. So we really look forward to working with you in January. I almost said July. I hope it doesn't go that long. In January to get to where we need to be to serve the community. So thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Stone and then Mayor.
Just a quick one. So not within your scope to put it in the draft budget and present it, but now that we're here, I would love to hear staff suggestions that we might be able to move other things forward to help. Please bring it forward to us. You guys know the organization better than we do.
Mayor Alcock?
Thank you, Chair Morrison. I just want to summarize as well that I really appreciate all of the work that went into this budget. And no question, as we've all said it, it was sticker shock for everybody around the table, and as it was, I know, for staff when you worked on it. You know, it's something that's higher than we're used to. But I do appreciate the ongoing discussion we've had around it. And, you know, trying to get your head around something like, well, you know, I appreciate there are other municipalities as well who are experiencing exactly what we're experiencing around this table. So I just want to say once again that I appreciate all of the work that went into this, and I look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock. And to follow up on that, it was definitely sticker shock for us, but I should give our finance team credit. They've been warning us about this since the minute we passed last year's budget. You know, like, they saw the tea leaves and warned us about what was coming. They know the climate more than all of us. So them and the senior leadership team knew that this was going to be a tough budget, which is, yep, go ahead.
Just in response to that, thank you, as well as the last year's budget. But when we brought in some of the changes around the table, and it was both staff recommendations as well as ours, we were reminded of this will have an impact throughout the year. So for me, the big tell going into 2024 is when we discuss in-year changes, we all need to keep in mind what the impact is. And you alluded to that earlier, Councillor Clark. Absolutely. And so I certainly will be more mindful of any in-year changes. I hope that we don't make a lot of in-year changes.
Which is great. And then we will come back on January 11th. And I ask everyone around this table, but especially if anyone's watching or reading this in some of the reporting, just picture yourself trying to run your household or run your own company, and then you get told that your costs are going up 60% and your revenue is not. So every director, every manager, everybody that brought forward budget items, they had to do exactly what they were doing or less with a lot less money and a cost of 60% more. I don't know how we could possibly think of a budget that doesn't go up when you think of that. That's just reality. That's the crappy situation we're in the whole world. So we'll come back in January. We'll regroup. We have a lot of good discussion today, some good information coming, and we'll do the best we can. I'll let Director McKenzie close off potentially.
I just was wondering if we wanted to put forward a motion to have, to direct staff to bring back those changes. We've got that prepared
Yes, we would love to do that. Okay. We have, if we need a mover and a seconder, we have Ned. Okay. Jessica has it all sorted out. They do so much stuff without us knowing. Yeah, it just gets done. Do I need to read this? Okay, sure. Everybody read quick. Okay, we have a motion moved by Mayor Alcock and seconded by Councillor Renwick. It is recommended that Report Corp 2023-86 Town Draft 2024 Consolidated Budget be postponed to the Special General Committee meeting January 11, 2024 with the following changes. I may as well just read through them. Capital contribution Medill fund replacement, proposed 50,000, change to delay to a future budget. Roads funding for roads need study, proposed 70,000, change to $70,000 to come from working funds reserve in the amount of one time. Utilize MAT funding for general revenues to offset the levy ongoing. Policy bylaw, notwithstanding section 3.A of municipal accommodation tax budget principles policy, budget and financial -20. The proposed was 180,000. The change to municipal accommodation tax funding ongoing in the amount of $180,000. Capital contributions from ending debentures in the finance budget. Notwithstanding sections 3.5.6 of budget and financial controls policy, budget and financial 21, the proposal was $87,000 and the suggestion is to remove. Environmental reserve, notwithstanding sections 2 and 3 of bylaw 2020-95 as amended, $444,000. Proposal is to reduce the reserve transfer and bring the revenue from the infrapipe lease into general revenues. Capital contribution, proposal was $138,650. Suggestion is to remove the additional increase recommended in 2024 in the amount of $138,650. Community requests, defer the projects as outlined in Appendix F to future budgets. Finance reserve contribution, notwithstanding the 2020 Asset Management Plan, Resolution 220-20, the time frame for eliminating the annual infrastructure deficit be increased from 20 years to 25 years. The budget was $79,150, and the proposal is recognizing that the capital contributions is stretched out over 25 years instead of 20 years. Is there a typo there in the 220-20, or is it 2020-20? That's right, so that's fine, okay, good. Okay, so now that that is on the table, we can have a discussion about it. So Councillor Stone and Mayor Alcock.
It was mentioned the proposed for use of the MAT tax funds was ongoing. I'm suggesting it's one time.
I think that's going to come back for discussion on January 11th, right? Like right now, the proposal there is that it would be ongoing, which is what Director McKenzie brought up.
It was actually another counselor.
Another councillor. You suggested that maybe it'd be a one-time thing. I'm suggesting we take that advice and bring it to our working group. So I think that this isn't making a decision, this is deferring all of these things to January 11th, right? Would that be correct?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's having staff bring back an amended draft budget, which will include these changes. So there's still opportunity for discussion, for sure, on the ongoing, and just keeping in mind that I think the desire was that we didn't want to set council up for more difficult situations in 25 by doing one-time funding that's going to catch you the next year. So I think that was the discussion around ongoing, but it's still open for discussion. It's not locked in because it's just going to be proposed in the new draft budget. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I do believe the environmental reserve, I don't know how important it is, Director McKenzie, but it's $444,096. Not that I have that embedded in my mind.
Is that okay? Do you want to follow up?
It just doesn't, it doesn't mention the SWB for park staff either.
So I was actually going to add that once, and another and further that staff be directed to bring back additional information regarding the justification, feasibility, whatever the wordings the clerks want to pick, but that staff be directed to bring back a summary or a report with respect to the request for positions.
Yeah, and I guess the report would be based on scenario A, B, C, D, and E, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yes, yeah, I've already seen messages where they're already getting ready to prepare that information. So I just think it solidifies it in the motion.
Sounds good. Mayor Alcock and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you. It's just, if I was looking at the chart, there's a reference to the debenture payment of $87,000. It's saying remove, and I'm wondering, does there need to be, I know you get this, Julia, but does there need to be a second part to what we're doing with that? Yeah, it's going, but it doesn't say that, so it just says remove.
Sorry, maybe I should make sure I understand. I thought it was to remove the money that was going into capital and just delete that line.
Yes, it is. Okay, so as long as it was defined that way, I may have misunderstood. Okay, good, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, over to Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair Morrison. Just a very small item, but we're missing a 0 on the MAT fund section at the end of the last column, I think. Thank you.
The numbers guy steps in there. Good. And the one thing, if I can comment, is the items that we're deferring to future budgets that were Schedule F, I believe, on the projects like benches and the scoreboard and everything else. I think we still need to have a discussion about that because I do know some of those projects should maybe still be included in the budget in case there's grant money available coming. It doesn't mean we have to fund it necessarily right now, but I think they should be budgeted. For instance, let's say one of the items, I think we did there's batting cages, there's scoreboards, there's all these things. If they're not in the budget at all, then they can't get done in 2024, right? If a user group comes to us and says, if it's in the budget, and a user group comes to us and say, listen, we can self-fund it, or we can go to HMATA, or we can get some help from other groups, can we still do it? Then at least it's in the budget. You know, I'm not saying we fund it, but Julia, how do we hold it in the budget? Like, for instance, the steam train thing for 80 grand, that's sitting there as a placeholder in case we get a grant for it, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I think the steam shit's a bit different because we actually have it as part of our asset management. Like it's already an existing asset. I mean, it's a bit awkward to put items in the budget if we're not intending on doing them. without a grant. I just don't know if that's our focus. We'd have to look at if that's our focus, if a grant comes forward, that we would focus on those ones rather than existing infrastructure, because that's typically where we look first, is to try and reduce the levy so that we don't have, so that we've got more reserves, that sort of thing, when we see those grant opportunities.
But something like that $80,000 item, we don't plan on doing that unless we get a grant. So I would say this would be similar. We don't plan on doing the scoreboard unless we get a grant. And I do know the high school has money to put towards that, and they would like to move forward on it. So just, it's a way to have an opportunity throughout the year to improve our community services without necessarily costing us money. So I want to find a way to do that, which we can discuss maybe in January. Deputy Mayor Armour?
Thanks, Chair. I just think it might be easier that we just make staff mindful of it, and if there are grants do come available, then they reach out to those user groups about those grants. But I don't think it should muddy the waters with our budget, really.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The only problem is some item, when people go apply for grants, if it isn't a budgeted item on a municipal budget, then they can't actually even apply for some of the grants. That's why we have the thing for the steam train on the budget, because if a grant comes up, we can apply. You have to be almost like shovel ready, for instance, that kind of idea.
So I was just going to say that is true. So for the municipality, for our projects, we would have to have those on our, generally we would have to have them on our books, or we would bring them forward as a report to have council approve those projects to be able to apply for the grants for them. But typically outside organizations wouldn't need it to be on our books to be able to apply for grants. And sometimes there's other opportunities for grants when they're doing it on their own, as opposed to having being required to be a municipality to apply.
We'll circle back on that. Councillor Clark?
Thanks, Chair Morrison. I would just say, just quickly, that I'm sure we'll have more conversation about that specific concern when the draft comes back in January. But I still am of the opinion that this budget year is not the year for many of those things, and we can always revisit them another year.
Yes, I tend to agree. We're not going to cut our park staff to get a scoreboard, for instance, right? So, okay. Yep, let's see the motion. Okay, so we added the bottom there, and further that staff be directed to report back on justification of the park's attendance and lead hand staff included in the draft budget. And we have the 0. Deputy Mayor Armour?
I'm just wondering, the last part, should it say justification, or should it just say with options? So I don't know if we want to justify 4 people. It's the options.
Yeah, the financial implications. Yep, I think that's good there. Yep. I like that. Any other comments on the motion? Okay, seeing that, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? And that carries. I guess I'll sign that later. With that, I suppose that's our portion done, and I can pass it back to Mayor Alcock to finish off the meeting, I think.
Okay. Not a whole lot more. So we don't have anything under a closed session, and we do not have business arising from a closed session, so I can turn that page. And so I have one motion. It has been moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Renwick. It is recommended that we do now adjourn at 1:59 p.m. All those in favor? And that carries.